Before you fall asleep tonight, something important will happen. Your brain will begin to act in ways it never does when someone is watching. This is not a metaphor. It is not poetic exaggeration. It is a measurable physical shift inside your head. When the lights go out across the city, when messages stop arriving, when footsteps fade and voices disappear, your brain notices something before you do. No one is watching anymore. And when there is no observer, the brain changes its rules. Right now, as you listen, your brain is still performing. Even alone, it behaves as if it might be judged. It edits thoughts before they fully form. It suppresses impulses. It arranges ideas into shapes that make sense to someone else. This is how the waking brain survives. But late at night, that system begins to loosen. Not suddenly, not dramatically, quietly. The brain does not ask permission. It does not wait for you to be ready. It simply senses the absence of eyes and begins to drift. Tonight, when no one is watching, your brain will become more honest than you are comfortable with. And that raises a disturbing question. If your brain behaves differently when no one is observing, then which version of you is real? The one you present during the day, shaped by expectation and consequence, or the one that emerges in the dark, unfiltered and unseen? This recording exists to stay with that question. If you are drawn to stories like this, if you find yourself listening longer than you expected, take a moment now to like this recording, share it with someone who listens at night, and subscribe to Sleepy Scientist Recordings. These recordings survive because quiet minds choose to keep them alive. Now let us return to the moment when observation fades. During the day, your brain is under constant surveillance, not just from other people, but from itself. Every thought is checked, every emotion is labeled, every impulse is evaluated against rules you did not consciously choose. Neuroscientists sometimes describe this as executive control, but that phrase hides something unsettling. It means your brain is never fully alone. Even when you are physically isolated, an internal audience remains. A silent watcher that asks, is this acceptable? Is this safe? Is this who I'm allowed to be? As night deepens, that watcher grows tired. The brain consumes enormous energy maintaining control. Suppressing thoughts costs fuel. Holding identity in place requires effort. When the world sleeps, the return on that effort disappears. There is no reward for performance, no punishment for deviation, and so the brain begins to relax its grip. This is why thoughts at night feel different. They arrive without invitation. They linger longer. They feel strangely intimate, sometimes unsettling, sometimes profound. You may notice memories resurfacing without warning, moments you believed were resolved, conversations you never finished, decisions that could have gone another way. This is not nostalgia. It is the brain operating without supervision. When no one is watching, the brain stops prioritizing what is useful and starts exploring what is unresolved. During the day, unresolved thoughts are inconvenient. They slow reaction time. They interfere with productivity. At night, there is no schedule to protect, so the brain opens doors it kept sealed. This is why late-night thinking often feels heavier, not because problems are worse at night, but because the brain finally allows them to exist fully. Something else happens as observation fades. The boundary between thought and sensation begins to soften. You may feel ideas in your chest. You may sense emotions without clear stories attached to them. You may experience sudden images without knowing where they came from. The brain is transitioning modes. It is stepping away from narrative and toward raw association. In this state, thoughts are no longer obligated to make sense. They only need to connect. This is the same state that produces dreams, creativity, and anxiety. The difference is whether you resist it. Most people try to regain control at night. They scroll, they distract, they replay familiar content to anchor the mind. But if you stop resisting, you may notice something subtle and strange. The brain does not want to scare you. It wants to be heard. Thoughts that appear uninvited are often thoughts that never found space earlier. Feelings that feel overwhelming at night are often feelings that were postponed. When no one is watching, the brain finally speaks in its native language. Images, sensations, fragments. This raises another question. If these thoughts are part of you, why do they only appear when you are alone in the dark? Because identity, as you experience it during the day, is a performance stabilized by observation. Take away the observer and identity loosens, not collapses, loosens. You may feel less certain of who you are at night. Your opinions may feel less rigid. Your fears may feel closer. Your desires may feel unfamiliar. This does not mean you are losing yourself. It means you are encountering parts of the mind that do not exist to be seen. From an evolutionary perspective, night has always been dangerous. Darkness meant vulnerability. Silence meant uncertainty. The brain evolved to scan internally when external information disappeared. If you cannot see threats, you imagine them. If you cannot hear others, you listen inward. Even in safe rooms, under artificial light, that ancient system remains active. Your brain does not know you are safe. It only knows that observation has ended. So it turns inward, searching for unresolved signals. This is why some of the most creative ideas arrive late at night, and why some of the darkest thoughts do too. They come from the same place, a mind no longer constrained by watchers. As you continue listening, notice what your own brain is doing. Notice whether thoughts slow or accelerate. Notice whether images appear without effort. Notice whether your sense of self feels slightly blurred. Nothing is wrong. This is what happens when the brain begins to operate without an audience. In the chapters ahead, we will move deeper into this unseen world. We will follow the brain as it hands control from one system to another. We will sit inside the moments when thought dissolves into sensation. We will remain present as identity softens and the line between waking and sleeping grows thin. But before that, consider this. If your brain becomes more honest when no one is watching, what does that say about the version of you that exists during the day? And if honesty emerges only in darkness, what parts of yourself have been waiting for night to arrive? When there is no observer, something subtle disappears first. Not sound, not light, but pressure. The pressure to be coherent, the pressure to remain consistent, the pressure to be someone recognizable. During the day, your brain carries an invisible weight. It is the weight of being seen, even when no one is physically present. This weight shapes how thoughts form. A thought does not simply appear. It is tested, adjusted, filtered. Is this reasonable? Is this appropriate? Is this useful? This process happens so quickly that it feels natural. But it is not natural. It is learned. From early childhood, the brain learns that being observed changes outcomes. Eyes bring judgment. Judgment brings consequence. So the brain adapts. It builds systems designed to predict how thoughts will be received before they are even fully formed. This is not morality. This is survival. The result is a waking mind that is never fully free. Even alone in a room, the brain behaves as if someone might enter at any moment. This is why people rehearse conversations in their head, why arguments continue long after they end, why explanations are crafted for events that have already passed. The observer does not need to be real. It only needs to be possible. But at night, possibility narrows. Doors lock, lights dim. The world withdraws, and the brain notices. The systems responsible for social monitoring begin to lose relevance. There is no one to impress, no one to defend against, no one to convince. Without external eyes, internal censorship weakens. This does not mean the brain becomes chaotic. It becomes private. Privacy, in the neurological sense, is not silence. It is permission. Permission for thoughts to arise without justification. Permission for emotions to exist without explanation. This is why nighttime thoughts often feel raw. They have not been edited for public viewing. They are not arranged into narratives designed to make sense to others. They are simply allowed. Imagine standing on a stage all day, every movement visible, every expression interpreted. Then imagine the lights going out. You are still there, but suddenly your posture changes, your face relaxes, your body no longer performs. This is what happens inside the brain when observation fades. The neural circuits responsible for impression management reduce activity. The brain reallocates energy, not toward rest yet, toward inward scanning. When no one is watching, the brain begins to watch itself differently, not as a judge, as a witness. This internal witness is quieter than the daytime observer. It does not ask whether thoughts are acceptable. It simply allows them to pass through awareness. This shift is why nighttime thinking can feel strangely intimate. Thoughts do not arrive dressed for an audience. They arrive as fragments, a memory without context, a sensation without cause, an emotion without a clear story. The brain is no longer constructing meaning for others. It is exploring meaning for itself. You may notice that thoughts loop more easily at night. This is not weakness. It is depth without interruption. During the day, loops are broken by obligation. A task interrupts. A notification redirects. A face demands response. At night, loops are uninterrupted. The brain follows a thread as far as it goes. Sometimes that leads to insight, sometimes to discomfort, often to both. The absence of observers removes a constraint that usually limits how far the mind is allowed to wander. There is another effect of unobserved thinking. Time changes, minutes stretch, sequences blur. You may think you have been lying awake for hours when only moments have passed. This is because the brain no longer needs to synchronize with external rhythms. Schedules dissolve. Clocks lose authority. Without shared time, the brain returns to internal pacing. A thought can take as long as it wants. This is why a single memory can feel endless at night. Not because it is large, because nothing is rushing the brain forward. In this unobserved state, the brain also becomes less defensive. During the day, many thoughts are rejected before they are felt. Too vulnerable, too strange, too impractical. At night, rejection weakens. This is when doubts surface, not dramatic fears, but quiet uncertainties, questions you never ask aloud. Am I moving in the right direction? Did that choice matter? Who would I be if things had gone differently? These are not questions meant to be answered immediately. They are questions the brain needs to hold. When no one is watching, the brain allows itself to hold them. There is a common belief that nighttime thinking is irrational. This is misleading. Nighttime thinking is unconcerned with justification. It does not need to defend itself. During the day, thoughts must explain their relevance. At night, relevance is optional. Only resonance matters. A thought stays because it feels important, not because it can prove why. This is why nighttime creativity feels different. Ideas appear without logic. Connections form without effort. The brain is not optimizing for efficiency. It is exploring possibility. This same openness explains why anxiety can intensify at night. Without observers, the brain turns its attention inward. Any unresolved signal becomes louder. A tension in the chest, a lingering unease, a thought without resolution. The brain is not trying to scare you. It is attempting to process information that never found space during observation. When you were watched, you postponed. When you are alone, postponement ends. This internal shift can feel unsettling. You may feel exposed to yourself, as if parts of your mind you did not authorize are suddenly present. This is not loss of control. It is loss of supervision. And there is a difference. Supervision limits, control directs. At night, control is still present. You can choose to move, to breathe, to listen. What changes is supervision. No internal voice asks whether this thought should exist. It already does. The absence of observers also softens identity. During the day, identity is reinforced constantly by names, by roles, by expectations. You are reminded who you are supposed to be. At night, reminders stop. Identity becomes fluid. You may feel less attached to labels, less certain of opinions, less invested in maintaining a consistent story. This can feel like confusion, but it is closer to neutrality. The brain is not erasing identity. It is pausing the performance of it. This pause is temporary, but within it, the mind experiences freedom. Not the freedom to act, the freedom to exist without being interpreted. As you listen now, notice whether your thoughts feel slightly different than earlier today. Notice whether ideas feel less structured. Notice whether emotions feel closer to the surface. This is the unobserved brain at work. It is not broken. It is not malfunctioning. It is simply operating without an audience. In the next stage, this inward attention deepens. The brain begins to redirect resources away from outward awareness entirely. The systems that monitor the world loosen their grip. Another set of systems prepares to take over, and as that transition begins, consciousness itself starts to drift. Not disappear, drift. And that drifting is where the most subtle changes begin to unfold. As observation continues to fade, the brain does something that feels almost imperceptible at first. It stops asking for confirmation. During the day, nearly every mental act seeks feedback. A thought checks whether it aligns with reality. An emotion looks for justification. A decision waits for validation. Even when no one responds, the brain still waits. At night, that waiting dissolves. Thoughts no longer pause at the edge of awareness to see if they are allowed inside. They enter fully formed without introduction. This is the moment when consciousness begins to feel less solid. You may notice that it becomes harder to hold a single thought in place. Ideas slip away before you can finish them. Images appear, dissolve, and are replaced by others without transition. This is not distraction. It is the brain releasing its grip on linear order. Linear thinking exists for communication. It is useful when ideas must be shared, explained, defended. When no one is watching, there is no need for sequence. The brain begins to think in layers instead of lines. A feeling can exist without a cause. A memory can surface without a timeline. A question can remain open without pressure to resolve. This layered state often feels like drifting, not falling, not floating, drifting, as if awareness itself has loosened its edges. Neuroscientists describe this as a reduction in top-down control, but what that really means is simpler. The brain stops forcing order onto experience. Order takes effort. Effort requires purpose. At night, purpose relaxes. This is why the sense of self begins to blur. During the day, the self is constantly reinforced. Your name is used. Your role is activated. Your identity is mirrored back to you through interaction. At night, there are no mirrors. Without reflection, the self becomes less defined. You may feel less like a character and more like a presence. This can be comforting or unsettling, or both. The feeling of being a presence rather than a person is unfamiliar to most people. It is rarely experienced in daily life, but it is a natural state for the brain. Long before language, before society, before identity as you know it, awareness existed without narrative. At night, the brain moves closer to that original mode. It does not announce this shift. It does not label it. You only notice it afterward, if at all. Often, it is noticed through contrast, a sudden realization that you have been thinking without words. That time has passed without being counted, that you are not sure what you were just thinking about, only how it felt. This is the beginning of conscious drift. In this state, the brain becomes more sensitive to internal signals. Subtle sensations grow louder. The weight of your body against the surface beneath you, the rhythm of your breath, the quiet pulse behind your eyes. During the day, these signals are drowned out by external input. At night, they rise. The brain redirects attention inward, not because it wants to, but because there is nowhere else to look. This inward focus is not deliberate. You do not choose it. It happens because the systems responsible for outward vigilance are no longer necessary. No movement to track, no voices to interpret, no faces to read. The brain conserves energy by shutting down unnecessary monitoring. What remains is internal awareness, and with it, internal truth. Truth in this context does not mean accuracy. It means immediacy. Whatever arises feels real because nothing contradicts it. During the day, a thought can be dismissed by reality. At night, reality is quiet. So thoughts echo longer. This is why nighttime worries feel convincing. Not because they are true, but because they are unchallenged. The brain is not designed to evaluate truth in isolation. It evolved to compare internal signals with external feedback. When feedback disappears, evaluation pauses. This pause is not dangerous by itself. It is simply unfamiliar. Many people try to escape this unfamiliarity. They reach for stimulation, light, sound, movement. These reintroduce observation. They pull the brain back into performance. But if you allow the unfamiliar to remain, something interesting happens. The brain begins to settle into the absence of watchers. Thoughts slow, not because they are forced to stop, but because there is no urgency pushing them forward. Urgency is a social construct. It exists when others are involved. deadlines, expectations, consequences. In solitude, urgency fades. The brain responds by softening. This softening is often mistaken for fatigue, but it is not exhaustion. It is release. The release of constant self-regulation. You may notice moments of clarity within this softness, sudden understanding without reasoning, a sense that something important is true, even if you cannot explain why. These moments feel different from daytime insights. They are quieter. They do not demand action. They simply exist. This is because nighttime cognition is not oriented toward outcome. It is oriented toward integration. The brain uses unobserved time to connect experiences that were kept separate. Memories linked to emotions, emotions linked to sensations, sensations linked to images. This process does not produce conclusions. It produces coherence, a feeling that things fit together, even if the pieces are not named. As coherence increases, conscious effort decreases. You may feel less compelled to think. Thoughts arise, but you do not chase them. You observe them pass. This is not meditation. You did not choose it. It is the brain naturally reducing control. At this point, the line between thinking and sensing becomes thin. An idea may feel like a pressure. A memory may feel like warmth. A question may feel like movement. Language begins to lose its grip. Words become optional. Images take their place. This transition is important. It marks the brain preparing to shift modes entirely. The unobserved brain does not move abruptly from waking to sleeping. It passes through a threshold, a space where awareness still exists, but structure does not. This threshold is fragile. Too much effort pulls you back. Too much stimulation reintroduces observers. But if nothing interrupts it, the brain continues inward. And as it does, something else begins to change. The sense of being located. You may no longer feel centered behind your eyes. Awareness may seem to spread, or soften, or dissolve into the space around you. This is not imagination. It is a change in how the brain maps the body. During the day, the brain maintains a precise sense of location, where you are, where your body ends, where the world begins. At night, precision is unnecessary. The brain allows boundaries to blur. This blurring is the doorway. Beyond it, thought no longer needs to identify itself as yours. It simply occurs. And once thought is no longer claimed, consciousness begins to loosen its hold. Not ending, not disappearing, just loosening, which leads to a question that the brain does not answer immediately. If awareness can exist without a clear sense of self, what exactly is falling asleep? And what continues even after you are gone? As the sense of location softens, the brain begins to do something counterintuitive. It reduces effort even further. During the day, awareness feels like work. You aim it, you hold it, you direct it toward tasks, faces, problems. At night, awareness stops being held. It rests, not asleep yet, not gone, just no longer gripped. This is why trying to force sleep often fails. Force belongs to the observed mind. Sleep belongs to the unobserved one. When no one is watching, the brain does not need to prove that it is awake. So it lets go. You may notice gaps appearing, moments where you cannot remember what you were just thinking. Not because the thought was unimportant, but because memory formation has already begun to loosen. Memory is designed for continuity. It exists to preserve a story. At night, the story is no longer required, so the brain stops recording everything. This is why nighttime awareness feels porous. Thoughts pass through without leaving a trace. Images appear and vanish without ownership. The brain is testing a different relationship with experience, one where nothing has to be kept. This state can feel unfamiliar because modern life rarely allows it. Even solitude is often filled with content, sound, light, information. True unobserved time is rare, but when it arrives, the brain recognizes it immediately. It has been waiting. There is a subtle relief in this recognition. You may feel it as a quiet sigh inside the chest, or a gentle heaviness behind the eyes. The body is responding to the brain releasing vigilance. Vigilance is expensive. It requires constant prediction. What will happen next? What might be needed? What could go wrong? At night, prediction loses relevance. Nothing is expected. So the brain stops scanning ahead. Attention turns inward, not to analyze, but to settle. This inward settling changes emotional tone. Emotions become less sharp, not because they disappear, but because they are no longer amplified by anticipation. Fear without future projection is quieter. Desire without action is softer. Even sadness feels different. It becomes weight rather than pain. This is one reason people often feel more emotional at night. Not more reactive, more open. Without observation, defenses relax. The brain stops bracing. You may notice that your thoughts become more honest, but also less judgmental. During the day, honesty often comes with critique. At night, honesty exists without commentary. A feeling can be present without being evaluated. This is not insight yet. It is preparation. The brain is clearing space. As external relevance fades, internal relevance rises. Signals that were ignored begin to surface, not loudly, gently. A sense that something matters, without knowing what. The brain is not presenting conclusions. It is presenting signals. These signals are subtle because they are not designed for language. They are designed for integration. The unobserved brain works by association. It links experiences without explaining them. A sound may connect to a memory. A sensation may connect to an emotion. An image may connect to a question you never asked out loud. These connections form quietly. You are not meant to watch them happen. If you try to observe too closely, they retreat. Because observation reintroduces structure, and structure is what the brain is letting go of. This is why awareness at this stage feels indirect. You sense that something is happening, but you cannot quite grasp it. Trying to grasp it brings you back. Letting it be allows it to continue. The unobserved brain does not respond to effort. It responds to absence, the absence of demand, the absence of expectation, the absence of audience. As this absence deepens, the brain begins to disengage from external orientation entirely. Sounds lose meaning. Words blur. If you hear something, you may not immediately recognize what it is, not because hearing stops, but because interpretation pauses. The brain is no longer labeling the world. Labeling exists for interaction. When interaction ends, labels dissolve. What remains is sensation without narrative. This is a critical threshold. Beyond it, the brain no longer distinguishes clearly between inner and outer experience. An imagined sound can feel as present as a real one. A remembered image can feel as vivid as something seen. Reality becomes less anchored to the senses, not in a dramatic way, in a quiet, almost gentle way. This is not dreaming yet, but the rules of waking reality are already loosening. At this stage, many people feel a brief sense of falling, or floating, or sudden movement. This is not a disturbance. It is the brain recalibrating its sense of orientation. When external reference points disappear, internal maps must update. The feeling passes quickly if not resisted. Resistance reactivates observation. Observation tightens control. Control delays the transition. The unobserved brain prefers trust. Trust that nothing needs to be done. Trust that awareness can drift without consequence. This trust is learned each night, then forgotten each morning. You do not remember falling asleep. You remember trying to. The rest happens without you, and that is the point. As this chapter continues, the brain is approaching a handover. One system releasing responsibility, another preparing to receive it. The observer is fading. But something else is beginning to take its place. Not thought, not identity, but a quieter form of awareness that does not need to know who it belongs to. And that is where the next shift begins. As the observer continues to dissolve, the brain begins to rely on a different kind of awareness. Not the awareness that names, not the awareness that evaluates, but the awareness that simply notices without separating. This form of awareness is older than language. It does not ask who is experiencing. It does not ask why something appears. It only registers that something is happening. When the watching mind fades, this quieter awareness becomes dominant. You may sense it as a widening. Thoughts no longer feel like objects in front of you. They feel like movements within a larger space. This space is not visual, not spatial in the usual sense. It is the feeling of being present without standing anywhere in particular. During the day, awareness feels localized, behind the eyes, inside the head. At night, location becomes optional. Awareness spreads. This spreading is subtle but profound. It is one of the first signs that the brain is no longer maintaining a strict boundary between self and experience. The boundary is effortful. It exists to keep identity intact. When effort relaxes, the boundary softens. This softening does not remove the self. It makes the self less rigid. You may notice that thoughts no longer feel owned. Instead of thinking, you feel that thinking is happening. Instead of remembering, you feel that memories are passing through. This shift is easy to miss, but once noticed, it changes how everything feels, because ownership is heavy, and the unobserved brain is learning how to put weight down. There is a quiet relief in this release, not excitement, not pleasure, relief, as if something has been held for too long and is finally allowed to rest. The brain responds to this relief by slowing. Neural activity does not stop. It reorganizes. Patterns that required constant reinforcement weaken. Patterns that operate automatically strengthen. This is why habits of thought loosen at night. Concerns that felt urgent earlier may now feel distant. Opinions that felt fixed may feel negotiable. The brain is not revising beliefs. It is suspending attachment to them. Attachment exists for interaction. When interaction ends, attachment fades. This does not mean that beliefs disappear. They simply stop demanding attention. In this state, the brain becomes receptive, not receptive to information, receptive to coherence. Coherence is the feeling that experiences belong together, even if they are not explained. The unobserved brain prioritizes coherence over clarity. Clarity is for communication. Coherence is for integration. This is why nighttime understanding often feels wordless. You may sense that something makes sense without knowing how to explain it. Trying to explain it breaks it. because explanation pulls the brain back into structure. Structure is daytime language. Nighttime language is felt. As coherence increases, the need for active thinking decreases. You may find yourself no longer searching for thoughts. They come or they do not. Either way feels acceptable. This acceptance is not resignation. It is alignment. The brain is aligning with a state where effort is unnecessary. This alignment prepares the nervous system for the next transition. But before that transition, there is often a moment of ambiguity, a moment where you are aware but not clearly. You may notice this as a flicker, a brief sense of blankness, not sleep, not unconsciousness, just absence of content. This absence can feel strange. The mind is accustomed to being filled with words, with images, with plans. When content disappears, the mind may react. It may try to generate something, a thought, a memory, a concern. This reaction is automatic. It is the observer checking whether awareness still exists. But if you do not follow the reaction, something different happens. The absence remains. And within that absence, awareness continues quietly. This is one of the most unfamiliar experiences for the waking mind. Awareness without content, presence without narrative. It feels like hovering at the edge of something. The brain does not rush past this edge. It lingers, because this edge is where control is handed over. The unobserved brain does not shut down consciousness abruptly. It thins it, like lowering the volume rather than turning off the sound. This thinning is why you may feel present but distant, why sounds seem farther away, why your own thoughts feel quieter. The world has not changed. Your relationship to it has. During this thinning, the brain becomes less precise. Precision costs energy. When energy conservation becomes a priority, precision relaxes. You may notice that sensations blur. The boundary of your body feels less defined. Hands and feet may feel heavier or lighter, or not clearly present at all. This is not numbness. It is redistribution. The brain is reallocating attention away from the periphery. It is preparing to focus inward completely. As this inward focus deepens, awareness begins to detach from intention. You may intend to think, but nothing happens. You may intend to move, but feel no urgency. This is not paralysis. It is disengagement. Intention is no longer the driver. The brain is shifting from voluntary control to automatic regulation. Breathing continues. Heart rate adjusts. Posture settles, all without instruction. This is the unobserved brain functioning as it was designed to, not responding, maintaining. You are no longer directing the process. You're being carried by it. This is why the moment before sleep often feels passive, as if something is happening to you rather than something you're doing. That is accurate. Sleep is not an action. It is a surrender. But surrender does not mean disappearance. Awareness lingers, quiet, diffuse, unclaimed. This lingering awareness is not concerned with identity. It does not ask who you are. It does not track continuity. It exists without history, without future, only presence. This presence is fragile. Any attempt to examine it closely brings structure back. Structure reactivates the observer. The observer tightens boundaries. The boundaries restore identity. The process reverses. But if nothing interrupts, the brain continues forward. The observer fades further. The need to witness dissolves, and awareness prepares to change form, not end. Change. As this chapter moves forward, the brain is approaching a threshold where awareness no longer needs to remain continuous, where gaps grow longer, where memory formation nearly stops, where presence begins to fragment into something else, something less linear, something that no longer requires you, and that is where the next movement begins. As the gaps between thoughts grow longer, the brain stops trying to fill them. This is an important moment. During the day, silence inside the mind feels uncomfortable. It signals boredom, inefficiency, loss of focus. At night, silence is not interpreted the same way. It is no longer a problem to solve. It is a condition to enter. The unobserved brain recognizes these empty spaces not as absence, but as opportunity. Opportunity to disengage from constant narration. Narration is how the waking mind maintains continuity. A story connects moments. A story preserves identity. A story answers the question of who you are from one second to the next. But when no one is watching, continuity loses value. The brain no longer needs to explain how one moment becomes the next. So, narration weakens. You may notice that inner speech becomes fragmented. Sentences do not finish. Words appear without structure. Sometimes only tone remains. This is not confusion. It is the brain releasing language as a primary tool. Language is social. It exists to be shared. When sharing ends, language fades. What replaces it is something more primitive: pattern. The brain begins to register experience as pattern rather than meaning, rhythms instead of reasons, shifts instead of stories, changes instead of conclusions. You may feel this as a gentle oscillation, awareness moving closer, then farther, clarity appearing, then dissolving. This oscillation is not instability, it is calibration. The brain is adjusting how much consciousness it needs to maintain. Too much wastes energy. Too little risks disorientation. So it tests. It lets awareness thin, then briefly strengthens it. Then thins again. This testing often feels like drifting in and out. You might catch yourself just before losing a thought, or realize that you have returned from somewhere without knowing where you went. These are not interruptions. They are rehearsals. The brain is practicing letting go. During these rehearsals, emotional tone changes again. Feelings lose their narrative charge. Fear becomes sensation. Desire becomes warmth. Sadness becomes heaviness without story. This transformation is subtle but important. Emotion during the day is linked to identity. I'm afraid because something threatens me. I want because it reflects who I am. I feel regret because it defines my past. At night, emotion detaches from identity. It becomes signal without ownership. The unobserved brain does not ask whose emotion this is. It only asks whether it needs attention. Most do not, so they pass. This passing is often mistaken for numbness, but it is not absence of feeling. It is lack of attachment. Attachment is effort, and effort is being withdrawn. As attachment fades, the brain becomes more tolerant of ambiguity. Questions can remain unanswered without creating tension. Uncertainty does not demand resolution. The mind no longer tries to close loops. This is why nighttime thoughts can feel circular without feeling urgent. They turn gently, they do not push. The unobserved brain is not trying to arrive anywhere. Arrival is a daytime goal. At night, movement itself is enough. As movement slows, awareness becomes increasingly diffuse. It no longer gathers tightly around a single point. Instead, it spreads thinly across experience. You may feel less like a center and more like a field, not watching thoughts, but containing them. This shift is difficult to describe because language assumes a subject. But here, subjectivity is dissolving, not disappearing, becoming irrelevant. This irrelevance is peaceful, because being a subject requires constant maintenance. You must know where you are, what you're doing, why it matters. When subjectivity loosens, those questions stop being asked. The brain conserves energy by not answering questions that no longer arise. This conservation affects memory directly. Memory formation requires attention. Attention requires intention. When intention fades, memory fades with it. You may notice that moments no longer stick. You are aware but not recording. This is why the transition into sleep is never remembered. There is no marker, no boundary, only a gradual thinning of continuity. At this stage, awareness becomes almost transparent. It is still present, but it does not announce itself. You are not aware that you are aware, and that is the last condition needed, because awareness that knows itself resists dissolution. Awareness that forgets itself can change form. The unobserved brain now begins to disengage from sustained presence. It allows awareness to fragment. Short lapses grow longer. Moments of blankness deepen. These blanks are not unconsciousness. They are unclaimed awareness. No observer inside them. No memory of them afterward. They pass like breaths you never notice. As these gaps widen, the brain prepares for the next shift. A shift not just in awareness, but in the architecture of experience itself. Soon, thoughts will no longer arise as fragments. They will arrive as scenes, not concepts, images, movement, emotion without edges. But before that happens, the last traces of the observer must dissolve. And that dissolution is quieter than anything that came before. So quiet that you will not know when it happens. Only that something else has begun to take over. Something else is already active before you notice that the observer is gone. It has been there all along, quiet, background, waiting. When supervision dissolves, this system does not arrive suddenly. It is revealed. The brain does not fall into chaos when control loosens. It shifts authority from management to maintenance, from narration to regulation. During the day, much of your brain is occupied with prediction. What will happen next? How you should respond? What must be avoided? Prediction requires constant reference to the outside world. But as the outside world disappears, prediction becomes unnecessary. There is nothing imminent, no demand, no signal requiring immediate interpretation. So the brain stops projecting forward. Instead, it turns inward and downward, toward rhythm, toward cycles, toward processes that do not need conscious input. Breathing, heart rate, temperature, balance. These systems have always been running, but now they become central, not because you focus on them, because nothing else competes for attention. This shift changes how awareness feels. Awareness no longer scans, it settles. You may notice that your breathing feels different, even though you did not change it. Slower, deeper, less deliberate. The body is taking over functions that were subtly monitored during the day. This is not surrender. It is delegation. The brain trusts these systems. They have kept you alive far longer than conscious thought ever has. As regulation becomes dominant, something important happens to mental activity. Thoughts lose urgency. They no longer demand completion. A thought can begin and then dissolve without discomfort. This is because thoughts are no longer needed to guide action. Action has paused. The brain no longer needs plans, so it stops finishing them. This is why nighttime thinking feels incomplete, not broken. Incomplete by design. The unobserved brain is not trying to resolve, it is trying to stabilize. Stabilization is about balance, not answers. If a thought creates tension, it is softened. If a memory carries emotional weight, it is diffused. This diffusion happens through association. The brain links signals until none stand out strongly enough to require attention. This is not problem solving, it is load balancing. Emotional load is redistributed across networks until intensity drops. You may experience this as a feeling that concerns are still present, but less sharp. They exist, but they do not grip. This is not denial. It is regulation without narrative. During the day, regulation often comes through explanation. You tell yourself stories to calm down. At night, explanation is unnecessary. The brain uses pattern and rhythm instead. Repeated breathing, steady pulse, darkness, stillness. These cues tell the nervous system that vigilance is no longer required. As vigilance drops, another subtle change occurs. Attention becomes passive. You are no longer directing it. It drifts to whatever signal is strongest in the moment. Often, that signal is not thought. It is sensation. The weight of your body, the texture of fabric, the faint hum of silence. These sensations are not analyzed. They are simply registered. This registration anchors awareness without effort. It gives the brain a reference point that does not require meaning. Meaning is expensive. Sensation is not. This is why the unobserved brain prefers sensation as consciousness thins. As sensation becomes primary, thought recedes further. You may notice that when a thought appears, it feels distant, as if it arises somewhere else and passes through. You do not follow it. You do not resist it. It moves on its own. This is a critical transition. Thought is no longer the center of experience. It is peripheral. The center is now regulation, maintenance, balance. The brain is no longer asking what you are thinking. It is asking whether the system is stable. Stable breathing, stable heart rhythm, stable muscle tone. When stability increases, consciousness can afford to dim. Dimming does not mean disappearing. It means becoming less focused. Like a light spread across a wider area, less intense, more diffuse. This diffusion creates a sense of softness. Edges blur. Boundaries feel less defined. You may no longer feel exactly where your body ends, not because sensation is gone, but because precision is unnecessary. Precision is for interaction. When interaction ends, precision fades. As precision fades, the sense of agency fades with it. You no longer feel like you're doing anything. Things are happening. Breathing continues. Awareness remains. But effort is absent. This absence of effort can feel strange. Some people interpret it as losing control. But control was never the goal here. Control belongs to the observed mind. This state belongs to the maintained mind. The brain is now prioritizing continuity of life, not continuity of self. Self requires memory. Memory requires attention. Attention is being withdrawn. This withdrawal is gentle, gradual, unannounced. You do not notice attention leaving. You only notice that nothing is being held anymore. As this continues, awareness becomes less personal. You may feel present, but not as someone, more like something, a field, a background. This is not dissociation. It is de-identification. Identity is a structure maintained by repeated reference. Without reference, identity softens. This softness allows the brain to transition to the next mode, a mode where experience is no longer anchored to the present moment in the usual way, where time begins to behave differently, where sequences are replaced by scenes. But before that can happen, one more adjustment must occur. The brain must reduce its need to track continuity altogether. And to do that, it begins to let awareness flicker. Brief lapses, tiny disappearances, not noticed, not remembered. These lapses are not failures, they are gateways. Each one loosens the grip of waking consciousness. Each one trains the brain to operate without constant awareness. Soon, these flickers will lengthen, and when they do, something new will begin to form in their place. At some point, the brain stops trying to keep awareness continuous, not abruptly, not decisively. It simply stops correcting the gaps. During waking life, whenever awareness falters, the brain reacts quickly. It pulls attention back. It restores focus. It repairs continuity. This repair happens so fast that you rarely notice it. But now, in the absence of observation, repair is no longer necessary. So the gaps remain. At first, they are brief, a moment where nothing is noticed, a pause without content, an instant with no memory attached. Then awareness returns, lightly, without urgency. You do not feel that something was lost, because nothing was claimed. These gaps are the earliest signs that consciousness is changing state, not shutting down, reorganizing. The brain is discovering that it can function without maintaining a constant stream of experience. This discovery is important. Continuous awareness is expensive. It requires coordination across many systems. When the brain learns that continuity is no longer required, it conserves energy by allowing experience to fragment. Fragmentation does not feel like breaking. It feels like drifting in and out of presence. You may notice that you are aware, then suddenly realize you were not. But there is no sense of interruption, no alarm, no confusion, just a gentle return. This gentleness is intentional. The unobserved brain avoids sharp transitions. Sharpness triggers vigilance. Vigilance reactivates the observer. So transitions become smooth, almost invisible. As fragmentation increases, the brain begins to change how it handles time. During the day, time is tracked constantly. Seconds are counted implicitly. Sequences are ordered. Cause follows effect. This ordering exists to support action. When action is no longer required, ordering loosens. Time stops behaving like a line. Moments no longer stack neatly. Instead, they blur. You may feel that several moments pass without distinction, or that a single moment stretches without movement. This distortion is not illusion. It is the brain disengaging from temporal accounting. Accounting is a social function. It exists so that behavior can be coordinated with others. When others disappear, accounting fades. The brain does not need to know what time it is. It only needs to maintain balance. As temporal tracking weakens, another system becomes dominant. Imagery. Imagery does not require time in the same way thought does. A thought unfolds. An image appears. It is complete the moment it arrives. This is why images begin to surface more often at this stage. Not vivid dreams, not yet, but fleeting visuals, shapes, colors, impressions. They appear without effort. They do not announce themselves. They vanish without explanation. These images are not messages. They are byproducts of a brain shift in modes. The networks responsible for visual imagination become more active as language quiets. Language needs structure, imagery does not. So when structure fades, imagery fills the space. This shift can feel unfamiliar. You may notice that images arise even when you are not trying to imagine anything. A place you have never been, a face without identity, a movement without context. The brain is no longer filtering for relevance. Relevance belongs to waking life. At night, association is enough. Images connect to sensations, sensations connect to emotions, emotions connect to nothing at all. This is how the brain begins to loosen narrative. Narrative requires sequence. Sequence requires time. Time is dissolving. As narrative weakens, the sense of cause and effect weakens with it. You may no longer feel that one thought leads to another. They simply appear and disappear. This lack of causality is not disorientation, it is release. The brain is letting go of the need to explain itself. Explanation is another social function. It exists to justify actions and thoughts to others. When no one is watching, justification is unnecessary. So the brain stops providing it. This is why nighttime experience can feel strangely honest. There is no spin, no framing. Things simply are. A feeling exists, an image exists. Then they are gone. The brain is not concerned with meaning yet. Meaning requires identity. Identity is still dissolving. At this stage, identity becomes intermittent. You may feel present, but not personal. Aware, but not located. The sense of being someone fades in and out, like a signal losing strength. This fading can feel peaceful, or unsettling, or both at once. If you try to grasp identity, it strengthens. If you let it fade, it continues to soften. The unobserved brain prefers softening, because softness allows transition. As identity weakens, the brain gains flexibility. It can move between states more easily. It can disengage from waking consciousness without resistance. This is why effort interferes here. Trying to sleep activates intention. Intention activates the self. The self pulls awareness back into structure. Structure delays the transition. But when effort is absent, the brain continues forward on its own. You may notice that awareness feels thinner now, not weaker, thinner, less dense, less occupied. You are not thinking less because you are tired. You're thinking less because thinking is no longer required. This distinction matters. Fatigue is depletion. This is efficiency. The brain is choosing a different operating mode. As this mode stabilizes, awareness begins to feel distant, not separated. Distant, like a sound heard from another room. You know it is there, but you are not focused on it. This distance allows the brain to reduce monitoring further. Monitoring is one of the last functions to fade. Once monitoring weakens, the brain can stop checking whether you are still awake. At that point, the transition accelerates. Gaps grow longer, returns become softer. Memory formation nearly stops. You may experience a brief sensation of dropping, or tilting, or being pulled gently inward. This is not a disturbance. It is the brain releasing its last anchors to the waking state. Anchors like posture, like spatial orientation, like the sense of up and down. When anchors release, experience becomes free from physical reference. This freedom is temporary, but it is essential, because beyond this point, consciousness will no longer organize itself around the present moment. It will reorganize around something else entirely, something that does not require continuity, something that does not require you. And as that reorganization begins, the nature of experience will change again. not gradually this time, but qualitatively, which is where the next chapter leads. Underneath the thinning of awareness, another shift is already underway. It does not announce itself. It does not demand attention. It simply begins. The brain starts to abandon the idea that experience must be anchored to the present moment. During waking life, almost everything is organized around now. What is happening? Where you are? What comes next? This anchoring is essential for action, but action has ended. So anchoring loosens. You may notice that experiences no longer feel tied to the moment you are in. An image can appear without feeling like it belongs to now. A sensation can exist without a clear location in time. A memory can surface without feeling like the past. Time has not stopped, but the brain has stopped insisting that experience obey it. This change alters the texture of consciousness. Instead of moving forward, awareness begins to hover, not progressing, not retreating, hovering. In this hovering state, experience becomes less directional. There is no sense of heading somewhere, no anticipation, no completion. Things arise, remain briefly, then dissolve. The brain is no longer asking what comes after. It is allowing what is. This is a critical adjustment. As long as the brain expects something next, it must remain awake enough to receive it. When expectation fades, vigilance fades with it. Expectation is one of the last threads tying consciousness to wakefulness. As it loosens, the brain grows quieter, not silent, quieter. The volume of mental activity lowers, not because thoughts are suppressed, but because fewer systems are active. During the day, many networks run in parallel, monitoring, planning, evaluating, remembering. Now, most of them are disengaging. The brain does not shut them off sharply, it lets them idle, like machines left running at low power. Only the most essential systems remain fully active, those responsible for balance, for basic awareness, for regulation. Everything else dims. As this dimming continues, imagery begins to organize itself differently. Earlier, images appeared as fragments. Now they start to feel more immersive, not yet dreams, but closer. An image may linger longer. It may carry movement, depth, emotion. The brain is beginning to simulate experience rather than observe it. Simulation requires less input from the senses. It can happen internally. This is efficient. When external information is scarce, internal generation fills the space. This is why the brain begins to turn inward so completely. It is not withdrawing, it is reallocating. The unobserved brain prefers internally generated experience because it does not require verification. There is no need to check whether it is accurate. Accuracy is irrelevant. Consistency is enough. As internally generated experience strengthens, external sensations lose priority. Sounds fade into the background. Physical sensations become less distinct. You may still hear or feel them, but they no longer interrupt. They pass through awareness without pulling it outward. This inward pull is gentle but persistent, like a slow current. You are not dragged, you drift. Drifting feels passive because intention is no longer involved. The brain is not waiting for instruction. It is following a program older than conscious thought, a program designed to protect energy and restore balance. As drifting deepens, the sense of effort disappears almost completely. You are no longer doing anything. Even listening feels automatic. Awareness remains, but it does not feel like an action. This absence of effort creates a subtle sense of inevitability. not in a dramatic way, in a calm way, as if whatever happens next will happen regardless of your involvement. This sense is accurate. The brain is in control now, not the conscious mind. This can feel unfamiliar because so much of waking life is built around the illusion of control. At night, that illusion fades, and with it, the need to maintain a central point of command. The brain begins to decentralize awareness. Instead of a single center, experience becomes distributed. There is no clear place where awareness lives. It feels spread out, diffuse. This diffusion allows the brain to reduce coherence further. Coherence requires coordination. Coordination costs energy. The brain is conserving. As coherence lowers, experience becomes less structured. Boundaries blur even more. Thoughts, images, and sensations overlap. You may not be able to tell where one ends and another begins. This blending is not confusion. It is integration without labels. Labels are unnecessary now. Nothing needs to be identified. Nothing needs to be remembered. The brain is no longer preparing you to act or report. It is preparing you to disengage. As disengagement progresses, awareness becomes intermittent. You may still feel present, but presence flickers. Moments of awareness alternate with moments of absence. The absences grow slightly longer, not enough to be noticed, enough to matter. These absences are not darkness. They are blankness. No experience, no memory, just nothing. And then awareness returns, softly. This returning does not feel like waking. It feels like surfacing gently, without urgency, without clarity. The brain is practicing letting awareness go. Each time it does, it learns that nothing goes wrong. Breathing continues. The body remains stable. There is no danger. This learning allows the brain to extend the absences further, to trust them. Trust is essential here. The brain must trust that awareness does not need to be constant. Once that trust is established, the final conditions are met. Awareness no longer insists on continuity. Identity no longer insists on presence. Time no longer insists on sequence. What remains is a readiness for experience to reorganize completely, not around the present, not around the self, but around a different structure altogether, one where experience unfolds without needing to be witnessed. And as that structure begins to form, consciousness prepares to change its shape again. When the brain no longer insists on being witnessed, experience changes its source. Until now, everything that appeared still required a trace of awareness to receive it, even fragmented, even fading. But there comes a point where reception itself becomes optional. The brain begins to generate experience without checking whether anyone is there to notice. This is a profound shift. During waking life, perception and awareness are tightly linked. Something happens, therefore it is noticed. Something is noticed, therefore it matters. Here, that relationship loosens. Images may arise without being fully perceived. Sensations may occur without registering as sensation. Processes continue without leaving memory. Experience is happening, but not being claimed. This is not unconsciousness. It is unclaimed consciousness. The brain is no longer organizing experience around a point of view. Instead, it allows activity to unfold wherever it needs to. This decentralization is essential. A centralized point of awareness requires constant maintenance. It must locate itself. It must orient. It must monitor. Without observers, the brain sees no reason to maintain that center, so it dissolves it. You may sense this as a loss of perspective, not confusion, absence of viewpoint. There is no longer a clear sense of looking at something. Things simply occur. This is why the transition into sleep cannot be described from within. Description requires perspective. Perspective is what is being released. As this release deepens, the brain begins to rely almost entirely on internally generated activity. External input becomes background noise, not ignored, unprioritized. The brain has enough material of its own, memory fragments, emotional residues, sensory echoes. These elements combine freely. They are no longer constrained by realism. They do not need to align with the present moment. They only need to cohere internally. This internal coherence feels different from waking logic. It does not follow cause and effect. It follows association, similarity, emotional tone. A feeling may summon an image may summon movement. Movement may summon a sense of place. None of this requires you. It unfolds on its own. The brain is no longer checking whether experience makes sense. Sense is a social requirement. At night, there is no audience to understand. So understanding is optional. This is where experience begins to feel dreamlike, even before dreaming begins. Not vivid, not immersive, but ungrounded. There is a softness to it. Edges dissolve quickly. Nothing holds long enough to demand attention. This softness allows the brain to disengage further from external orientation. Orientation is another energy cost. Knowing where you are, which way is up, how your body is positioned. These details fade. You may not be able to tell exactly how you are lying, or whether your eyes are open or closed. Not because sensation is gone, because distinction is unnecessary. The brain is simplifying. Simplification is the goal. As complexity reduces, stability increases. A simpler system is easier to maintain without conscious oversight. This is why the brain strips experience down to essentials. Breathing rhythm, basic sensation, internal imagery, everything else is surplus. As surplus fades, awareness becomes extremely light, almost transparent. You may feel as if you are barely there. This feeling can be misinterpreted as disappearing, but nothing is disappearing. The brain is still active. In fact, some regions are becoming more active than before. They are just active without reporting. Reporting is a waking function. It exists so experience can be remembered and communicated. Here, neither is required. Memory formation slows to almost nothing. Moments are no longer marked. There is no before, no after. Only brief islands of presence separated by blankness. These islands do not connect. They do not form a story. This is exactly what the brain needs. Stories bind consciousness to time. Time binds consciousness to wakefulness. Without stories, time dissolves. Without time, wakefulness cannot sustain itself. The brain is preparing for a different architecture of experience, one where continuity is replaced by immersion. But immersion does not begin immediately. First, awareness must become intermittent enough to let go of sequence entirely. This intermittence feels like slipping, not falling, slipping sideways, out of alignment with the waking world. The body continues to function, regulation remains intact, but the sense of being present weakens further. You're no longer following experience. Experience is no longer following you. Both are loosening. At this depth, any attempt to reassert control would feel jarring. Control would require reassembling the observer, reestablishing perspective. recreating identity. The brain avoids this by keeping transitions extremely smooth. Nothing announces itself, nothing demands response. Everything fades gently. This gentleness is protective. Sharp transitions activate alertness. Alertness would reverse the process, so the brain keeps everything soft. As softness increases, awareness becomes less frequent. Absences stretch. Returns become faint. Eventually, awareness does not return at all for long periods. But this absence is not darkness. It is simply nothing being registered. Behind that nothing, activity continues, complex, ordered, unseen, and within that unseen activity, a new form of experience is beginning to assemble. One that does not need awareness to exist first. One that will appear whole rather than forming gradually. And when it does, it will not feel like thinking. It will feel like being somewhere else entirely. Something changes when experience no longer waits to be noticed. Until this point, even the faintest trace of awareness still acted like a landing surface. Events happened, then brushed against consciousness before fading. Now, that surface begins to disappear. The brain no longer checks whether experience has been received. It stops asking. This does not feel dramatic. It feels like forgetting to look, not choosing not to look, simply no longer remembering that looking was ever required. In this state, experience becomes self-sufficient. It does not need confirmation. It does not need reflection. It does not need memory. Processes unfold without supervision. This is a critical transition because supervision is what keeps the waking world coherent. Supervision maintains order. When supervision fades, order changes its shape. Instead of being organized around awareness, experience organizes around efficiency. The brain prioritizes whatever costs the least energy while maintaining internal balance. This is why repetition begins to appear. Repeating rhythms, repeating sensations, repeating fragments of imagery. Repetition is stable. It requires little effort. The unobserved brain favors stability over novelty. Novelty demands attention. Attention is expensive, so novelty fades. What remains are loops, gentle, self-sustaining loops, breath moving in and out, blood moving through familiar paths, electrical patterns cycling through known routes. These loops are not boring to the brain, they are comforting. Comfort, in neurological terms, means predictability without vigilance. Predictability allows the brain to disengage further. As loops stabilize, awareness becomes almost entirely passive. You are no longer participating in experience. You are not resisting it either. Participation and resistance both require agency. Agency is being withdrawn. This withdrawal can feel like sinking, not downward, inward, as if attention is being pulled away from the surface of things. The surface still exists. Sounds may still be present. Sensations may still register faintly, but they no longer define experience. They float at the edges. The center is empty. This emptiness is not absence of activity. It is absence of reference. Nothing is being compared to anything else. Nothing is being measured against the self. This is why emotion changes again here. Earlier, emotion softened. Now it becomes diffuse. Emotion no longer has a clear object. It is not about something. It is a tone, a background coloring, a mood without narrative. This tone can be neutral, or heavy, or warm. But it does not point anywhere. It simply exists. The brain is no longer using emotion as information. It is using it as atmosphere. Atmosphere requires no interpretation. You do not analyze the air. You exist within it. As experience becomes atmospheric, thought loses almost all structure. When thoughts appear, they are incomplete, half-formed, unfinished. They dissolve before becoming language. You may catch the beginning of a sentence that never reaches words. This is not interruption. It is deactivation. Language is being turned off gradually. The systems that support inner speech are quieting. Speech is unnecessary now. No one is listening, not even you. This is why awareness becomes harder to locate. You may no longer feel like you are inside your head or inside your body. Location dissolves. Awareness is no longer anchored to a point. It is spread thinly across experience, then thinner still, until it barely feels like anything at all. At this depth, memory formation has nearly stopped. Even if awareness flickers briefly, it does not record itself. Moments vanish as they pass. There is no accumulation, no timeline. This is essential. Accumulation would rebuild continuity. Continuity would rebuild the self. The brain is avoiding that. The brain is protecting the transition. As continuity fades, experience becomes more fluid. Images, when they appear, no longer feel like images you're seeing. They feel like environments forming around nothing. Not places yet, but spatial impressions. Depth without location. Movement without direction. These impressions are the earliest traces of a different mode of experience, one that does not require awareness to arrive first, one that arrives whole. The brain is assembling this mode quietly, behind the scenes, without signaling, because signaling would require awareness, and awareness is being set aside. At this stage, even the sense of drifting may disappear. Drifting implies motion relative to something. Here, there is nothing to drift from. Experience is no longer moving. It is settling into a configuration that can sustain itself without supervision. This configuration is not wakefulness, but it is not yet what comes after. It is a holding pattern, a suspension, where the brain maintains internal order while letting consciousness thin to almost nothing. You are not present here, but nothing is missing. The body remains regulated. The brain remains active. Only the witness has stepped away. And as the witness remains absent, experience begins to organize itself into something that does not require witnessing at all. Something that will not arrive gradually. Something that will appear as if it has always been there, waiting. Experience no longer forms as fragments. It begins to assemble itself, not piece by piece, not gradually, as a whole. The brain has reached a point where continuity is no longer maintained, but something else replaces it. Immersion. Immersion does not require awareness to arrive first. It arrives complete. You do not watch it form. You find yourself inside it. This is a fundamental change. Earlier, experience appeared and disappeared without ownership. Now experience holds. It has weight, not physical weight, presence. Images no longer flicker briefly and dissolve. They linger. They surround rather than pass through. You may sense space where there was none before, depth without distance, movement without direction. This space is not imagined deliberately. It is generated automatically. The brain is no longer checking whether the space makes sense. Sense is irrelevant. What matters is coherence. Everything within this space belongs together, even if it would not belong in waking life. This is the moment when experience stops referencing the body. earlier, the body faded into the background. Now it is no longer a reference point at all. You may not feel your weight. You may not feel your position. You may not feel your breathing, not because these things stop, because experience is no longer organized around them. The brain has shifted fully to internally generated structure. This structure does not need the external world. It sustains itself. As immersion deepens, time dissolves almost completely. There is no sense of duration, no sense of sequence. Experience does not unfold. It exists. Moments do not follow one another. They overlap or replace each other without transition. You may sense that something is happening, but not that it started or will end. This timelessness is not dramatic. It feels natural. As if time was never required here. In this state, awareness does not feel absent. It feels unnecessary. There is no point of view observing what is happening. There is simply happening. This is why memory will not form. Memory requires a point of reference, someone to remember. Here, there is no one, only experience. The brain is operating in a mode designed for restoration, not rest alone, integration. During waking life, experiences are separated by context. Work here, emotion there, memory stored away. Now separation dissolves. Elements that never touched during the day begin to connect. A feeling may blend with an image. An image may blend with a sense of movement. Movement may blend with atmosphere. These blends do not explain themselves. They do not need to. Explanation would require language. Language is fully offline now. Inner speech has gone quiet, not paused, released. There is no commentary, no labeling, no interpretation. This silence is not empty. It is filled with structure that does not speak, structure that feels. The brain prefers this. Words slow things down. They impose order. Here, order is implicit. As immersion stabilizes, experience gains momentum, not speed. Continuity of its own kind. Scenes shift without warning. Environments change without reason. You are not surprised by these changes. Surprise requires expectation. Expectation is gone. Everything feels equally acceptable, equally real. This is why fear rarely appears here. Fear depends on projection. What might happen next? Here, there is no next, only now, without duration. Emotion exists, but as tone rather than reaction. A scene may feel heavy, or calm, or strange, but it does not demand response. You do not react. Reaction belongs to wakefulness. Here, experience is absorbed rather than engaged. The brain is no longer maintaining boundaries between inner and outer. There is no inner, there is no outer, only content. This content does not ask where it came from. It does not ask who it belongs to. It exists because the brain is active. That is enough. As this mode continues, the last traces of the waking world lose relevance. Any remaining sounds from outside fade completely. They may still reach the ears, but they do not enter experience. The brain has closed the gate, not forcefully. Simply by no longer attending. Attention is fully internal, but not focused, distributed everywhere and nowhere. This distribution is stable. It does not require maintenance, which is why the brain can remain here for long periods, long without time, sustained without effort. The system has found its balance, and within this balance, experience becomes something else entirely. Not thought, not sensation, not awareness as you know it. Something that does not need to be witnessed, something that continues even when nothing is watching. And while this continues, the waking mind is nowhere to be found, not resting, not observing, simply absent, which is exactly what allows this state to exist at all. Experience, once fully immersed, begins to acquire a strange sense of autonomy. It no longer feels like something that is happening to you. It does not feel like something you are inside of either. It feels as though it is happening on its own. The brain, having released the need for supervision, now operates as if no witness will return to check what occurred. And because of that, it allows itself to explore more freely. During the day, the brain avoids wandering too far from relevance. It trims associations. It interrupts strange links before they grow. Relevance is enforced by consequence. But here, consequence has disappeared. There is no outcome to prepare for, no decision to justify, no action to follow. So the brain begins to roam, not randomly, selectively. It follows emotional gravity rather than logic. Wherever there is unfinished weight, it drifts there. Wherever something was suppressed, postponed, or left unresolved, it lingers. This is why the content that begins to form here often feels personal, even though there is no sense of self attached to it. Images may resemble places you have known, but altered. Faces may appear without identity, yet feel familiar. Situations may unfold that never happened, yet feel emotionally true. The brain is not replaying memory, it is reorganizing it. Memory during the day is cataloged by context, when and where something happened, who was involved, what it meant. Here, context dissolves. What remains is emotional residue, tone, tension, relief, curiosity. These residues act like magnets. They pull fragments toward each other. Fragments that never met while you were awake. A childhood sensation may blend with an adult concern. A recent conversation may echo inside an older fear. A forgotten image may attach itself to a feeling that never had words. This blending is not deliberate. The brain is not trying to teach you anything. It is trying to integrate. Integration is not explanation. It is resolution without narrative. During the day, resolution often comes through understanding. You explain why something happened. You assign meaning. You place it into a story. At night, resolution comes through saturation. The brain allows an emotional signal to exist long enough, in enough forms, that it no longer needs attention. It becomes familiar, and familiarity reduces intensity. This is why certain worries lose their sharpness after sleep, even if they are not solved. The brain has absorbed them. But before absorption can happen, the brain must loosen structure even further. The environments forming here are not stable. They shift, they recombine. A place may transform into another without transition. A scene may collapse into sensation. Sensation may dissolve into nothing. This instability is not chaos. It is flexibility. The brain is testing combinations, not to find the correct one, but to exhaust the signal. Once a signal has been expressed in enough ways, it no longer demands repetition. That is when it fades. This is why some dreams feel repetitive. The brain is circling something, returning to it from different angles, not because it enjoys it, because it has not finished integrating it. Here, before dreams fully form, the same process begins in a quieter way. You may sense recurring impressions, the same emotional tone returning in different forms, a similar atmosphere appearing again and again. This repetition is intentional. It is the brain working through residue. As immersion continues, these internal environments become richer, not clearer, richer. They acquire texture, depth, movement, but they still lack logic. They do not obey physical rules. They do not obey time. They obey coherence. Coherence means everything fits together emotionally, even if it would never fit in waking life. You may sense that something is happening, but not know what. This knowing without knowing is characteristic of this state. The brain has stopped translating experience into concepts. Concepts require language. Language is fully disengaged now. Without language, the brain relies on sensation and image. These are older systems. They evolved before speech. They are efficient. They do not ask questions. They do not demand explanation. They simply generate. As generation becomes dominant, the sense of passivity deepens. You're not choosing what appears. You're not guiding it. You're not reacting. Reaction has no function here. The brain is not waiting for feedback. This is why fear is rare in this state. Fear requires anticipation. It requires imagining what could go wrong. Here, nothing is projected forward. Everything exists in a self-contained present. Even when content feels dark or heavy, it does not alarm. It is experienced as atmosphere, not threat. The brain knows there is no action required. This knowledge is implicit. It does not come as reassurance. It is simply assumed. As assumption replaces vigilance, the system stabilizes further. Stability allows the brain to let go of even more. The last remnants of bodily reference fade. Earlier, the body was background. Now it is irrelevant. You may not feel breath or heartbeat at all. Not because they stop, because experience no longer includes them. They exist outside the structure of immersion. The brain has fully decoupled internal experience from external input. At this depth, even the sense of drifting disappears. There is no movement. Movement implies space and direction. Here, space is fluid. Direction does not apply. Experience rearranges itself without traveling. Scenes replace scenes. States replace states. There is no transition. One moment simply is. Then it is not. Then something else is. There is no gap you can remember, no bridge you can trace. This absence of transition is important. Transitions require awareness. They require noticing change. Change is no longer being noticed. So transitions vanish. This is why memory will later fail. There is nothing to mark, nothing to store. Without markers, memory cannot form. The brain is not malfunctioning. It is intentionally suspending recording. Recording would waste energy. Recording would also preserve separation. Separation is no longer useful. The brain is now operating in a unified mode. Experience is not divided into observer and observed. There is only activity, activity without witness. This is not unconsciousness. Complex patterns continue. Neural activity is rich. Some areas are highly active, others are silent. The difference is that none of it is being reported. Reporting is a waking feature. It exists so that experience can be shared. Here, there is no one to share with. So reporting shuts down. As reporting ceases, the brain becomes free to operate according to internal priorities alone. These priorities are not logical. They are regulatory, balance, restoration, integration. The content forming here serves those goals. Not understanding, not insight, integration. This is why some dreams later feel symbolic. Not because the brain is speaking in code, but because symbols are efficient carriers of emotional information. They compress complex signals into simple forms. Here, before full dreaming, that compression is already underway. Images condense meaning. Scenes condense history. Atmospheres condense emotion. Everything is becoming denser, even as awareness thins. This density allows experience to persist without support. It can exist without being held. And because it can exist on its own, the brain can withdraw even further. Awareness becomes almost completely absent. Not gone, but no longer participating. There may be long stretches with no registration at all, no experience that can later be recalled. And yet, activity continues uninterrupted. This paradox is central. Experience continues without experience being experienced. The brain is crossed into a mode where consciousness, as you know it, is no longer required. But something else is forming. Something that will soon replace immersion with narrative again. Not the waking narrative, a different one. One that unfolds without logic, without time, without self. One that will feel like a world rather than a process. And while that world has not yet fully appeared, its foundations are already being laid. Quietly, automatically, without asking whether anyone is watching. At this depth, the brain begins to do something that seems impossible from the waking perspective. It starts to rebuild structure without rebuilding the self. Until now, experience has been fluid, immersive, unclaimed. But total fluidity cannot be sustained forever. Even in sleep, the brain needs organization. What changes is not the need for structure, but the type of structure used. During waking life, structure is built around identity, who you are, where you are, what time it is. Here, those anchors are gone. So the brain builds structure around something else. Continuity of feeling. The brain no longer asks whether experiences make sense logically. It asks whether they belong together emotionally. This is the beginning of a different kind of order, an order that does not require explanation, an order that does not require memory, an order that exists only while it is happening. You may sense this shift as a subtle tightening inside immersion, not tension, coherence. Earlier, scenes replaced scenes without connection. Now, connections begin to form, not causal connections, resonant ones. A tone persists across changes. An atmosphere remains even as imagery shifts. A feeling carries forward without attaching to a story. This persistence creates a thread, not a narrative thread, a sensory one. The brain is learning how to maintain experience without waking consciousness. This is not dreaming yet. Dreaming has characters, events, sequences. Here, the structure is simpler. It is built from mood and motion. You may feel as though you are inside a state rather than a scene. Inside heaviness, inside calm, inside something undefined but consistent. The brain uses these states as scaffolding. They allow experience to remain organized without invoking identity. Identity would require perspective. Perspective would require awareness. Awareness is still being withheld. This scaffolding is efficient. It costs little energy, and it allows the brain to deepen the state further. As this emotional continuity strengthens, imagery becomes more stable, not sharper, more persistent. An image may return repeatedly in slightly altered forms. A space may reappear with different details. A movement may repeat with variation. This repetition is not conscious. It is regulatory. The brain is reinforcing patterns that support stability, patterns that do not excite, patterns that do not alarm, patterns that can be sustained without interruption. This is why the content here often feels neutral, even when it is strange. strangeness without threat. Unfamiliarity without fear. Fear requires evaluation. Evaluation is offline. Here, the brain is not judging what appears. It is only checking whether the system remains balanced. If an image disrupts balance, it dissolves. If a sensation destabilizes rhythm, it fades. What remains is what fits. Fitting replaces meaning. This is a profound shift. In waking life, meaning determines importance. At night, fit determines persistence. You may sense that certain impressions linger longer than others, not because they matter, because they integrate. They do not pull attention outward. They do not demand reaction. They settle easily into the background state. This background state is now the primary container of experience. Earlier, the background was blankness. Now it has texture. A low-level tone, a continuous atmosphere. This atmosphere holds whatever appears. It does not interact with it. It simply allows it to exist. As the atmosphere stabilizes, awareness becomes even less defined. There is no longer a sense of flickering in and out. Flickering implies observation of absence. Here, absence is not noticed. Awareness is so diffuse that it cannot track itself. It exists without self-reference. This is why the brain can now maintain experience without recording it. Memory requires a reference point. A moment must be marked as this happened to me. Here, there is no me, so nothing is marked. Yet the brain remains active, highly active, especially in regions involved in emotion, imagery, and internal simulation. The difference is that activity is no longer routed through consciousness. Consciousness is not the manager. It is barely present. This decoupling allows the brain to operate in parallel. Multiple processes unfold simultaneously without interference. There is no central narrative to coordinate them. They coexist, blend, replace one another. This parallelism is efficient. It allows integration to happen quickly. Signals that were isolated during the day now overlap. Their boundaries dissolve. And as boundaries dissolve, their intensity reduces. This is one of the hidden purposes of this state, not rest. Resolution. Resolution without insight. You will not wake up knowing what was resolved. You will only feel different, lighter or quieter or more stable. This happens because the brain has redistributed emotional weight, not removed it. Redistributed it so that no single signal dominates. Dominance is exhausting. The brain avoids it when possible. As redistribution continues, the atmosphere itself begins to change. It may grow deeper, more enveloping, less distinguishable. The sense of being inside something increases, but there is still no sense of location. It is not inside a place. It is inside a condition. This condition does not have edges. You cannot find where it begins or ends. You are not at its center. There is no center. This lack of center is essential. A center would imply perspective. Perspective would imply identity. Identity would reactivate waking structure. The brain avoids this by keeping experience centerless. Everything is equally near, equally far, equally unimportant. This equality removes hierarchy. Without hierarchy, nothing demands attention. Without demand, the system can deepen further. As deepening continues, the emotional continuity becomes dominant. Imagery now serves emotion, not the other way around. Scenes form to carry tone. Movement exists to express atmosphere. Nothing exists for its own sake. Everything supports regulation. At this point, the brain is very close to transitioning into full dream architecture. But it is not there yet. Something still holds it back. the absence of narrative time. Dreams, unlike this state, still have sequence. They still imply before and after. Here, time is almost entirely dissolved. Experience exists in a suspended present. Dreaming requires just enough time to return, so the brain begins to test temporal structure again. Gently, subtly, you may sense a faint ordering, a sense that something follows something else, not clearly, not reliably, just enough to hint. This hint is not experienced consciously. It is felt as a slight increase in momentum, as if experience is beginning to move again, not drifting, moving. This movement is the signal. The brain is preparing to reintroduce narrative, but without identity. A narrative without a narrator, a story that tells itself. But before that can happen, one more adjustment must occur. The emotional field must become stable enough to support sequence, without destabilizing, without waking you, so the brain continues to smooth, to equalize, to soften any sharp edges. Anything that could provoke reaction is muted. Anything that could pull awareness back is avoided. The system is extremely careful here, because the difference between this state and wakefulness is fragile. Too much structure would collapse it. Too little structure would dissolve it. The brain balances precisely, holding the atmosphere steady, holding awareness diffuse, holding identity absent. And in that balance, the conditions for the next transformation quietly assemble, not announced, not felt, simply becoming possible. The brain does not begin to dream by accident. Before any story appears, before any scene gains momentum, something more subtle must be restored. Sequence. Not the rigid sequence of waking life, measured by clocks and cause, but a softer ordering, a sense that one moment can follow another without tearing the fabric of experience. Until now, experience has existed as atmosphere, timeless, centerless, balanced. But atmosphere alone cannot support narrative. Narrative requires movement. Movement requires direction. Direction requires just enough time to return. So the brain begins to reintroduce time, carefully, not as measurement, as flow. You may sense this as a gentle forward pull, not urgency, not anticipation, momentum. Experience begins to feel less suspended, less still. It does not rush. It simply begins to lean. This leaning is the earliest trace of sequence. Earlier, scenes replaced one another without relation. Now, something lingers from one moment into the next. A tone carries forward. A sensation leaves an aftertaste. An image leaves a shadow. This shadow is important. It creates continuity without explanation. The brain is not rebuilding logic. It is rebuilding transition. Transition allows experience to move without waking awareness. As transition strengthens, imagery becomes more cohesive, not clearer, more connected. A space may remain consistent across changes. A direction may persist even as details shift. Movement may imply before and after without defining either. This is the threshold. Experience is no longer static. It is no longer fully fluid. It is beginning to move on its own. The brain is testing whether this movement can be sustained without reactivating the observer. If movement becomes too sharp, attention returns. If sequence becomes too clear, identity follows. So everything remains soft. Edges are blurred, logic is absent, but continuity is present. This balance allows the brain to begin constructing scenes, not stories. Scenes. Scenes do not require explanation. They exist all at once. You're not told how you arrived. You are simply there. This is efficient. The brain avoids building paths. Paths imply memory. Memory implies self-reference. Scenes avoid both. As scenes stabilize, the emotional field adapts. Earlier, emotion was diffuse. Now it becomes localized, not attached to a self, attached to a scene. A place feels calm. Another feels heavy. Another feels strange. Emotion now organizes experience. It provides internal consistency. As long as the emotional tone remains stable, the brain can allow sequence to grow. This is why dreams are often emotional before they are logical. Emotion is the scaffold. Logic is optional. The brain is not trying to communicate meaning. It is trying to maintain coherence while allowing movement. As scenes begin to change, you may sense continuity without awareness. A scene shifts into another, but nothing marks the transition. You do not feel surprised. Surprise requires expectation. Expectation has not returned. Everything feels equally plausible, equally acceptable. This is critical. If something felt impossible, waking evaluation would return. The brain avoids impossibility by suspending judgment. Judgment is still offline. What exists simply exists. This is why dreamlike experience feels convincing while it happens. Not because it is realistic, because nothing contradicts it. Contradiction requires comparison with waking rules. Those rules are still absent. As sequence stabilizes, time begins to exist again, not measured, felt. You may sense that something happened earlier or that something will happen next, not clearly, but enough to support flow. This reintroduction of time is one of the most delicate operations the brain performs. Too much time wakes you, too little dissolves narrative. The brain adjusts constantly. If emotional tone destabilizes, sequence slows. If sequence destabilizes, imagery softens. Everything is regulated automatically. No oversight, no correction. The system is self-adjusting. This self-adjustment allows the brain to deepen into a new mode of experience, one where events unfold, where change occurs, where something can happen, but without a central witness. There is still no sense of being someone, no role, no identity. Experience unfolds without ownership. This is why dream characters often lack clear identity. Faces appear without names. Voices speak without origin. You do not ask who they are. Asking would require self-reference. Self-reference is still unnecessary. The brain has created a narrative space without a narrator. This space is remarkably stable. It can persist for long stretches without waking awareness. It can generate complex scenes, movement, interaction, but all of it remains unclaimed. There is no memory forming, no recording. When memory appears later, it will be reconstructed, not retrieved, because nothing is being stored in the usual way. As this mode stabilizes, the brain begins to increase complexity. Scenes become richer, more detail, more movement, not to entertain, to integrate. Complex scenes allow complex emotional signals to be expressed and resolved. A single image cannot carry everything, but a sequence can. The brain uses narrative to process what could not be processed during the day, not by explaining it, by experiencing it without consequence. In this space, outcomes do not matter. Actions do not lead to real results. Nothing needs to be fixed. This lack of consequence is essential. It allows the brain to explore combinations freely, to simulate without risk. Simulation is one of the brain's oldest tools. It existed before language, before society, before identity. At night, Simulation returns to its original form, unsupervised, unrecorded, unjudged. As simulation deepens, the boundary between image and sensation softens. You may feel movement without moving. You may feel impact without pain. You may feel presence without body. The brain no longer checks sensory input against reality. Reality is irrelevant. Internal consistency is enough. This internal consistency is what makes dreams feel real while they happen, not because they resemble the waking world, because nothing challenges them. The absence of challenge is key. During the day, reality constantly challenges internal simulation. At night, simulation runs unopposed. This is why the brain must ensure that emotional tone remains stable. If fear spikes, the challenge returns. Fear activates vigilance. Vigilance pulls awareness back. The brain avoids this by muting sharp emotion. Even frightening dreams are often strangely muted. You may feel fear, but without full intensity. Enough to express, not enough to wake. This fine control is automatic. The brain monitors internal signals continuously, not consciously. It adjusts output to maintain sleep. This monitoring is not observation, it is regulation. As narrative becomes more elaborate, identity still does not return. You may act within scenes, but not as yourself. Roles exist, but they are not attached to waking identity. This separation protects sleep. If you were full of yourself, concern would return. Concern would wake you. So the brain keeps identity diffuse, flexible, replaceable. This is why you can be someone else in dreams without questioning it. Questioning would require self-awareness. Self-awareness is still withheld. As this state continues, the brain has achieved something remarkable. It has rebuilt movement, time, and structure without rebuilding the self. This is the core of dreaming: experience without witness, narrative without narrator, activity without memory. It is a stable state, one the brain can remain in for long periods. And while you are here, the waking world no longer exists, not even as absence. It is simply irrelevant. The brain is fully occupied, not resting, working, integrating, resolving, balancing, all without supervision, all without you. And as this mode deepens, it will continue to elaborate. Scenes will become more vivid, sequences more fluid, emotion more precise. But none of this will be noticed as it happens, because noticing is not part of this architecture. Only later fragments may surface, images, feelings, a sense that something occurred, but the experience itself will remain unclaimed, unremembered, which is exactly what allows it to do its work without interference. And while this work continues, the brain will remain in this world it has constructed, a world that exists only because no one is watching. At some point, the brain begins to loosen the seal between its internal world and the body again. Not fully, not enough to wake you, just enough to prepare for return. Until now, internal experience has been sealed off, self-sustaining, unconcerned with consequence. But the brain does not intend to remain here forever. Sleep is not disappearance, it is a cycle, and every cycle contains the trace of its own ending. This preparation does not feel like awakening. It feels like subtle resistance, a faint increase in density. As if the internal world gains a little weight, scenes still unfold, but they feel slightly less fluid. Emotion still organizes experience, but its grip tightens. There is more definition, not clarity, definition. Edges begin to reappear, not sharply, but enough to hold shape longer. The brain is increasing coherence. Earlier, coherence existed only to maintain balance. Now, coherence begins to support recall, not full memory, traces. The brain is deciding what can be allowed to leave this internal world. Most of what happens here will remain unrecorded. It has already done its work. But fragments may be useful, not as stories, as signals. The brain selects without awareness. It does not ask which experiences matter. It measures intensity, resonance. Anything that shifted internal balance significantly may leave an imprint, not as narrative, as feeling. This is why you sometimes wake with a mood you cannot explain. Something was integrated, something shifted, but the process remains hidden. As coherence increases, time becomes slightly more structured again, not enough to count, enough to imply order. Before and after begin to exist faintly. Not within scenes, between them. Scenes no longer replace one another completely. They overlap, they echo. A scene leaves residue that influences what comes next. This residue is emotional. Tone carries forward. The brain is slowly rebuilding temporal scaffolding. It must do this carefully. Too much structure would wake you. Too little would dissolve what remains. So the brain adjusts incrementally. You do not feel this adjustment, but it changes the character of experience. Dreams, if they occur here, become more narrative, not logical, but sequential. Something happens, then something else. You may begin to feel involved again, not as yourself, as a role. Roles are safer than identity. They allow participation without self-reference. This is why dreams often place you inside events without reminding you who you are. You act, but you do not reflect. Reflection would activate waking awareness. The brain avoids that. As participation increases, the sense of passivity shifts. Earlier, experience happened without you. Now you may feel as though you're doing something, moving, responding, but effort is still absent. Action occurs without intention. This is simulation. The brain rehearses patterns without consequence. Simulation serves a purpose. It allows the brain to test combinations, responses, emotional reactions, all without risk. This testing is not strategic. It is exploratory. The brain is not planning, it is sampling. Sampling emotional responses, sampling associations, sampling resolutions. Anything that reduces internal tension is reinforced. Anything that increases it is softened or abandoned. This is why dream scenarios often change abruptly. If a simulation destabilizes the system, the brain drops it. No explanation, no transition, just replacement. The goal is not narrative integrity. The goal is regulation. As simulation continues, the body begins to re-enter the equation, not as sensation, as signal, heart rate, breathing, muscle tone. These signals remain regulated throughout sleep, but now they begin to influence internal experience. A change in breathing rhythm may shift the tone of a scene. A subtle movement may alter imagery. The brain is reconnecting internal and external systems. This reconnection is necessary for waking. But it must remain indirect. Direct awareness of the body would wake you. So influence occurs without perception. This is why dreams sometimes seem to respond to physical state. A racing heart may produce urgency. A relaxed body may produce calm scenes. The brain is aligning internal simulation with bodily regulation. As alignment increases, internal experience becomes less isolated. It begins to synchronize with cycles, breathing cycles, sleep cycles. The brain is preparing to transition again, but not yet. First, it must complete integration.
Integration is not a moment. It is a gradual redistribution. Emotional weight that entered this state earlier is now diffused. No single signal dominates. Everything has been expressed enough. The system approaches equilibrium.
As equilibrium approaches, intensity drops. Dreams may become less vivid, scenes less dramatic. Experience grows quieter, not emptier, quieter. The brain no longer needs elaborate simulation. The work is nearly done. At this stage, awareness remains absent. You're not observing any of this, but the architecture of experience is changing. The internal world begins to thin, not fragment, thin. Scenes lose detail. Emotion softens further. Movement slows. The brain is reducing complexity. Complexity requires energy. As restoration completes, energy can be conserved. This thinning often goes unnoticed. There is no clear moment when dreams fade. They simply stop forming. Experience becomes less structured again, not like earlier suspension, different.
This is a gentle unwinding. The brain is closing the internal world it constructed, not abruptly, gradually. As it closes, the last traces of narrative dissolve. What remains is regulation, balance, silence without emptiness. The brain rests here briefly, not unconscious, but unoccupied. No simulation, no narrative, just maintenance. This is one of the deepest forms of sleep, and it cannot be remembered. There is nothing to remember, no experience, only function. During this phase, the brain recalibrates. Neural connections adjust strength. Patterns that were reinforced during the day are weakened or strengthened. This happens without imagery, without emotion, without awareness, pure physiology. This is where restoration completes. Eventually, internal signals change, hormones shift, neurotransmitters adjust. The balance that held the system in deep sleep begins to tilt. Not enough to wake you, enough to begin ascent. The brain does not reverse the path it took to descend. It takes a different route. Ascent is not the opposite of descent. It is reconstruction. But reconstruction will not begin with identity. It will begin with sensation. Before thought returns, before memory, before self, the body will return. Weight, position, temperature, these signals will slowly regain relevance. But not yet. For now, the brain remains in this quiet, unstructured state. No scenes, no stories, no witness, only regulation, only balance, only time passing without being counted. And somewhere inside this stillness, the conditions for waking are forming, not as intention, as inevitability. The cycle is turning. But you are not back yet. You're still nowhere. And nowhere, for the brain, is exactly where it needs to be before anything can begin again. The first thing that returns is not thought. It is weight. Not physical weight in the ordinary sense, but the quiet realization that the body exists again. Earlier, the body was irrelevant. Breathing happened somewhere else. The heart moved without notice. Limbs had no position. Now, without asking, the brain begins to bring the body back into relevance. Not sharply, not clearly, as a pressure, a vague sense of mass. You may feel the surface beneath you without recognizing it. You may sense contact without location. You may feel heaviness without direction. This is not waking, it is reattachment. The brain is reconnecting internal regulation with external structure. It does this carefully. Too much sensation would pull awareness up too quickly. Too little would leave the system disconnected. So sensation returns as suggestion rather than information. The body is announced, not described. Along with weight, rhythm becomes noticeable again. Breathing, which never stopped, begins to influence experience, not as a thing you notice, as a tempo. Internal activity subtly synchronizes with inhale and exhale. The brain is rebuilding coordination between systems. During deep sleep, coordination existed without awareness. Now awareness is slowly being prepared to return, but not yet. The brain does not restore consciousness all at once. It layers it. First sensation, then orientation, then thought. At this stage, sensation exists without interpretation. You do not think, "This is my body." There is no ownership yet. Ownership belongs to identity. Identity has not returned. There is only signal. As bodily signals increase, internal imagery loses dominance. Scenes that once held structure begin to thin, not break, fade. They lose texture. Movement slows, emotion flattens. This is not loss, it is release. The brain no longer needs internal simulation to regulate. That work is complete, so simulation is dismantled, not erased, set aside. As imagery fades, the internal world becomes quieter, not empty, simpler. The brain prefers simplicity during transition. Complexity would require control. Control would demand awareness. Awareness is still being withheld. As simplicity increases, time begins to reassert itself, not clearly, but enough to create sequence again. Earlier, sequence existed without memory. Now sequence begins to support continuity, not continuity of self, continuity of state. One moment leads gently into the next. You may sense this as a faint sense of progression. Something is happening, something is changing, but you do not know what. This is intentional. Knowing would activate reflection. Reflection would activate the observer. The observer is not ready yet. The brain continues rebuilding orientation slowly. Along with weight, direction begins to form. Up and down are not clear, but there is a sense that things are arranged, that the body has shape, that space has order. This order is extremely soft. It does not demand attention. It exists in the background. As order increases, awareness becomes slightly denser, not sharper, more present. You may feel as though you are closer to something, not sure what, closer than before. This closeness is the return of proximity. Earlier, experience was everywhere and nowhere. Now it begins to gather, not around identity, around sensation. Sensation is the safest anchor. It does not ask questions. It does not evaluate. It simply exists. The brain uses sensation to rebuild the center of experience. This center is not yet a self. It is a location, a vague here. Once here exists, awareness can begin to localize. Localization is necessary for waking, but it must be incomplete. Complete localization would wake you too soon. So the brain maintains ambiguity. You are somewhere, but you do not know where. You are present, but you do not know as who. This ambiguity allows the system to stabilize. As stabilization continues, memory remains offline. Even now, nothing is being recorded. Moments pass without leaving trace. This is why the transition out of deep sleep is never remembered. Memory does not resume until identity returns. Identity has not returned yet. The brain is still prioritizing regulation over narration. As bodily signals become clearer, emotion remains muted. Not absent, muted. Strong emotion would trigger concern. Concern would pull awareness upward. The brain avoids this by keeping emotional tone neutral. This neutrality feels calm, not peaceful. Calm. Peace implies awareness of calm. Here,
Calm simply exists. The nervous system settles into a balanced state, neither deeply withdrawn nor alert. This balance is temporary. It is a bridge. As the bridge holds, the brain begins to test attention again. Not full attention, micro-attention, brief moments where awareness sharpens slightly, then relaxes. You may experience these as tiny flickers, a brief sense of presence, then softness again. These flickers are probes. The brain is checking whether awareness can return without destabilizing the system. If a flicker increases heart rate or tension, the brain pulls back. If nothing changes, the brain allows the next flicker to last a little longer. This gradual testing prevents abrupt waking. Abrupt waking would feel disorienting. The brain avoids that. As flickers lengthen, orientation improves slightly. You may begin to sense that you are lying down, not clearly, but as a possibility. Possibility is enough. Certainty would activate thought. Thought would activate identity. The brain is not ready for that yet. At this point, experience exists in a quiet limbo. Not dreaming, not fully asleep, not awake. The internal world has closed. The external world has not reopened. Only the body bridges them. Weight, rhythm, temperature. These signals grow slightly more distinct, but they do not yet form a picture. No room, no bed, no story, just presence without context. This state is fragile. Any sharp sound or movement could collapse it, but left undisturbed, the brain continues its careful reconstruction. The next thing to return will not be thought. It will be orientation to environment. Not who you are, where you are, where requires less self than who. The brain always rebuilds place before identity, because place grounds awareness safely. Identity carries consequence. Before consequence can return, the system must be stable, so the brain waits, holding awareness in this half-formed state, letting sensation exist without meaning, letting presence gather without name. This waiting is not passive. The brain is active, adjusting neurotransmitters, shifting balance between systems, preparing the conditions for conscious thought to reappear without shock. As this preparation continues, awareness grows slightly brighter, not enough to notice, enough to support the next layer. Soon, the mind will begin to ask silent questions, not verbal, felt. Where am I? Is it morning or night? These questions will arise before words, before memory, before self, but they are not here yet. For now, the brain holds you in this narrow space between absence and presence, between regulation and awareness, between nowhere and somewhere. And it holds you there because this is the safest place from which to begin again. The return does not begin with identity, it begins with orientation. Before the brain allows you to know who you are, it needs you to know where you are. Place is safer than self. Place carries fewer consequences. So the mind begins to assemble a sense of environment without naming it. Space first, not the idea of a room, but extension. Near and far begin to separate again. Surfaces regain distance from one another. Depth returns as a feeling before it becomes a picture. You may sense openness or enclosure without recognizing either. This is not imagination. It is spatial mapping coming back online. During deep sleep, the brain did not need to track space. Now, it does. Not for action yet, for grounding. Grounding stabilizes awareness. Awareness without grounding becomes anxious. The brain avoids that. So it rebuilds space slowly, gently, without detail. As space returns, the body gains clearer outline. Earlier,
Weight existed without location. Now, weight settles somewhere. Pressure has direction. Contact has edges. You may feel that your body occupies space again, but not exactly how. There is still no ownership. No thought of this is my body. Only signal. The brain is reconnecting sensory maps. It does not turn them all on at once. That would overwhelm the system. Instead, it lets one sense inform another. Touch informs position. Position informs balance. Balance informs space. This chain is deliberate. Balance is the anchor. If balance feels stable, the brain can allow awareness to rise. If balance feels uncertain, awareness stays low. So balance is checked repeatedly. Subtle adjustments occur. Muscle tone shifts slightly. Breathing synchronizes more clearly with posture. All of this happens without conscious involvement. You are not participating. You are being reassembled. As spatial awareness strengthens, time begins to reorganize again, not as sequence, as duration. Earlier, time did not exist at all. Then it existed as flow. Now it begins to exist as persistence. Moments last long enough to be noticed, not long enough to be remembered. This persistence allows awareness to rest briefly on something, not content, condition. You may sense that you are here for more than an instant. This sense of being here is fragile. It does not yet include story. It does not include memory. It is simply continuity without identity. The brain holds this carefully. Continuity without identity is the bridge. If identity returned too soon, it would carry expectation. Expectation would bring concern. Concern would wake you abruptly, so the brain delays identity. Instead, it deepens orientation. As orientation deepens, sensory detail increases slightly, not sharply. Textures become more distinct. Temperature differences register. You may sense warmth or coolness without attaching meaning. Meaning is still offline. The brain allows sensation to exist without interpretation. This keeps awareness present but unreactive. Reaction would engage thought. Thought would engage self. The brain is still regulating assent. As sensation grows, memory remains absent. Even now, nothing is being recorded. This is why these moments will never be recalled. They are essential but unremembered. The brain uses them to prepare the system, not to inform you. As orientation stabilizes, awareness becomes more centralized. Earlier, awareness was diffuse. Now, it begins to gather, not behind the eyes yet, more like a general center of presence, a sense that there is a here, not a me, just here. This here is enough. It allows the brain to begin restoring attention, not full attention, selective attention, attention that can rest on sensation without questioning it. You may notice that certain sensations stand out briefly. The feeling of contact, the rhythm of breathing, then fade. This coming and going is intentional. The brain is training attention to return without attaching. Attaching would create narrative. Narrative would require memory. Memory would require self-reference. All of that is still delayed. As attention flickers gently, the nervous system remains calm. Heart rate stays stable. Muscle tone remains low. The brain monitors this continuously. If any sign of tension appears, attention is withdrawn again. The system oscillates, a little more awareness, then a little less. Each oscillation increases tolerance. Soon, awareness can be sustained longer without disturbance. As tolerance increases, the environment begins to feel more real, not clearly defined, but present. There is a sense that something surrounds you, not just space, but context, context without detail. You may feel enclosed or supported. These feelings are not yet attached to objects.
They are environmental moods. The brain uses mood to orient before perception. Mood is faster. It does not require analysis. As environmental mood stabilizes, the first traces of thought begin to stir. Not words, intentions, very small ones. A faint impulse to adjust position, a subtle desire to move. These impulses are not acted upon. They appear and dissolve. The brain is testing agency. Agency is dangerous at this stage. Too much agency would wake you, but some agency is necessary. Waking requires the ability to act, so the brain introduces agency in minimal form, an impulse without execution. If the impulse does not disturb the system, the brain allows another later. Gradually, agency returns as possibility rather than command. Alongside agency, emotion remains muted, not flat, balanced. Strong emotion would tie awareness to memory. Memory would activate identity. Identity would activate concern. The brain avoids this chain, so emotion remains background tone, neutral, safe. As this continues, the sense of being somewhere becomes more specific. Not a room yet, but a bounded space. Boundaries are felt before they are seen. You may feel that space has limits, that there is an above and below. Left and right may begin to separate. Orientation is rebuilding in layers. This layered reconstruction is why waking feels gradual, even when it seems sudden. The groundwork has been laid long before thought returns. At this stage, awareness can remain present for longer stretches, not continuous, but extended. You may hover here for a while. In this quiet state where nothing happens, but something is assembling. This hovering is comfortable. There is no urgency. The brain has time. It does not rush awakening. Rushing would be inefficient. Gentle transitions preserve stability. As awareness strengthens, the first fragments of memory may appear, not memories of the past. Markers, a sense that something came before this moment, not what, just that there was a before. This is crucial. Before this, there was only now. Now the concept of before begins to exist again. This allows time to extend backward. Once time extends backward, it can extend forward, but that comes later. For now, the brain is satisfied with the idea that this moment is not alone. As soon as before exists, after becomes possible. Possibility is the seed of thought. Thought has not returned yet, but the soil is ready. The brain continues adjusting chemical balances. Neurotransmitters shift. Networks associated with alertness increase activity slightly. Not enough to wake, enough to prepare. You remain unaware of these changes. They are felt only as subtle clarity. Not thinking clearly, being clearer. As clarity increases, the sense of here becomes more definite. You are somewhere, still not sure where, but the idea of somewhere has taken hold. This is the final preparation before the mind begins to name things. Naming will bring language. Language will bring memory. Memory will bring identity. Identity will bring you back. But that sequence has not started yet. The brain pauses here deliberately, holding you in orientation without self, in presence without narrative. This pause is protective. It ensures that when identity returns, it returns into a stable environment, not confusion, not disorientation, just quiet continuity. You are almost there, but not yet. The brain will not release the next layer until it is certain the system can handle it. So it waits, breathing steady, body settled, awareness gathered, space assembled, time stretching gently behind you, all conditions met. And somewhere in this carefully balanced state, The mind prepares to remember how to be someone again. The first thing the mind dares to do is not to remember. It is to ask very quietly, without words, whether it is allowed to return. This question is not conscious.
It is not formed in language. It exists as a hesitation, a pause inside presence. Earlier, awareness gathered around sensation and space. Now, it begins to lean inward again toward something familiar but not yet named. The brain is testing identity. Not the full structure, only the outline. A faint sense that there is a center from which experience could be organized. This center does not yet say, me. It is closer to a point of gravity. Experience begins to curve gently around it. Nothing snaps into place. Nothing announces itself. The brain proceeds slowly because identity is heavy. Identity carries memory. Memory carries consequence. Consequence carries responsibility. The sleeping brain avoids responsibility, so it introduces identity in fragments. The earliest fragment is ownership of sensation. Not the thought, this is my body, but the feeling that sensation belongs somewhere. A subtle shift occurs. Pressure is no longer just pressure. It is pressure happening to something. That something is not defined, but it exists. This is the beginning. As ownership of sensation stabilizes, the brain allows a little more continuity. Moments begin to link, not into stories, into threads. A sensation lingers long enough to be followed by another related one. Breathing leads to chest movement. Chest movement leads to position. Position leads to orientation. Orientation now has a center, not named, but implied. The brain watches this carefully. If tension rises, it will pull back. If calm remains, it will proceed. Calm remains. So the next layer is allowed. The mind begins to retrieve context, not memory, context. Context is lighter than memory. Memory says what happened. Context says where this is happening. You may sense that this space is familiar, not because you remember it, because your body recognizes it. Recognition does not require narrative. Muscle tone adjusts as if the surface beneath you is known. Breathing settles as if the air is expected. The brain uses bodily familiarity to anchor identity safely. This is why waking in an unfamiliar place feels disorienting. The brain has less context to rebuild upon. Here, context is stable, so identity can approach. As context strengthens, the first traces of memory flicker. Not images, impressions. A vague sense that there is a life connected to this body, not details, just the weight of continuity. Something existed before this moment. That knowledge returns before any specific recollection. The brain does this deliberately. Specific memories would bring emotion. Emotion would bring concern. Concern would accelerate waking. So memory returns as shadow before substance. Along with this shadow comes the first hint of language, not words. Cadence, the rhythm of thought before words form. You may feel a readiness to think without thinking anything. This readiness is new. Earlier, thought was absent. Now the system that supports thought is warming up. Neural pathways increase activity. Not enough to produce content, enough to prepare. As readiness grows, awareness sharpens slightly, not alert, defined. You may feel closer to the surface of experience, closer to waking, but still not there. The brain maintains a buffer. This buffer prevents sudden transition. Sudden transitions feel jarring. The brain prefers smooth gradients. As identity outline strengthens, agency returns in a new way. Earlier,
Impulses appeared without execution. Now intention begins to form, very small, a desire to move a finger, a sense that movement is possible. Possibility is important. It allows the brain to test control. Control is part of identity, but control must return gently. The brain introduces it as option, not command. You may feel that you could move, but do not need to. This balance is intentional. If you felt compelled to move, you would wake. If you felt unable, you would remain too deep. So the brain holds you in between. As this continues, memory edges closer. Not personal memories, functional ones. How to move, how to breathe deliberately, how to orient eyes. These skills are memory too, but they do not carry story. They are procedural. Procedural memory returns before autobiographical memory. This is why you can move before you remember who you are. The brain prioritizes function over narrative. As function stabilizes, awareness becomes more continuous, no longer flickering, sustained, but still soft. You are present now, not fully, but enough to feel presence as presence. This is the threshold. Beyond it, identity will begin to speak, but the brain hesitates one last time. It checks emotional state. Emotion remains neutral. Good. It checks bodily state. Stable. Good. It checks environment. Quiet. Good. Only now does it allow the next layer. The first wordless thought appears, not about the world, about being. A subtle sense of I am here, not I am someone, just I am. This is the lightest form of identity, existence without attributes. The brain chooses this carefully. It allows awareness to settle into being without invoking role or memory. This is the safest way to return. You may feel this as a gentle clarity, a sense of wakefulness without urgency. You are not alert. You are present. From here, everything else will follow naturally. Names, roles, memories, plans, but they have not returned yet. The brain pauses again, because once identity fully returns, sleep is over. And the brain does not rush endings. It lets you hover in this state, aware enough to exist, not aware enough to worry. In this space, you may feel calm in a way that is difficult to recreate later, because identity has not yet brought its weight. You exist without expectation, without history pressing forward, without future pulling you ahead, just being. This moment is fleeting. It cannot last, but it matters, because it is the moment when the mind crosses back into itself, gently, quietly, without anyone watching. And from here, the final reconstruction will begin, not as a shock, not as a snap, but as a gradual remembering of who you are supposed to be today, one layer at a time. Breath by breath, until the night releases you completely. Thought does not return as a voice. It returns as tension, not sharp, not painful, a slight tightening in the fabric of awareness. Earlier, being was effortless. Presence existed without demand. Nothing needed to be done. Now, something subtle changes. The mind begins to sense that it can do, not that it must, only that it could. This possibility introduces strain, not the strain of stress, the strain of choice. Choice is heavy. Choice requires a center, and a center is beginning to form. The brain is reassembling agency. Agency is not action yet. It is the capacity for action, a readiness that hovers just below the surface. You may feel this as a faint alertness, not anxiety, readiness. As if something is about to be required, though nothing is. This readiness is the shadow of waking life. It appears before thought, before memory, before words. The brain is cautious here.
Agency is powerful. Too much too quickly would shatter the calm that has been carefully maintained. So the brain introduces agency as pressure, not command, a subtle forward lean. As agency strengthens, attention sharpens further, not globally, selectively. Awareness begins to settle on particular sensations. The feeling of breath becomes clearer. The weight of the body feels more defined. The boundary between body and space becomes easier to sense. This selectivity is new. Earlier, awareness was spread evenly. Now, it begins to focus. Focus is expensive. The brain does not allow it to run freely yet. It limits focus to neutral sensations, things that do not provoke emotion, things that do not carry memory. This is intentional. Emotion would pull memory. Memory would pull identity. Identity would bring consequence. The brain is still controlling the ascent. As focus stabilizes, the first true thoughts approach, not sentences, shapes, structures of meaning without language. You may sense a concept without words, a sense of morning or night, a sense of before and after. These concepts are pre-verbal. They exist as orientation rather than narrative. The brain is restoring its ability to categorize experience. Categorization is essential for waking life, but categorization must be reintroduced gently. Harsh categories divide experience too sharply. Sharp divisions would feel jarring, so the brain begins with broad categories: here versus not here, now versus not now. These distinctions form quietly. They do not demand attention, they simply exist. As categorization returns, memory edges closer again, this time not just as shadow, as availability. You may feel that you could remember something, not what, just that remembering is possible. This possibility changes the tone of awareness. Earlier, presence was weightless. Now it gains gravity. The mind begins to pull inward, toward itself. This inward pull is identity forming, not yet named, but gathering. The brain is rebuilding the narrative engine, the system that tells you who you are across time. But it does not activate it fully. It primes it, like warming an engine without starting it. You may feel a faint mental hum, not noise, potential. This hum is the readiness of thought. As readiness increases, inner silence changes quality. Earlier, silence was empty. Now, silence feels expectant, as if something could speak at any moment. This expectancy is the final stage before language returns. But language has not returned yet. The brain delays words deliberately. Words lock experience into form. Once words appear, waking identity follows quickly. The brain wants to ensure stability first, so it allows thought to exist without speech. Abstract, unspoken. This is why you may feel aware, but not thinking, or thinking without knowing what. The system is online, but idle. As thought readiness grows, emotional tone shifts slightly, not dramatically. Emotion becomes more personal. Earlier, emotion was atmospheric. Now it begins to feel attached, not to events, to existence itself. You may feel a faint concern, not worry. Concern, the sense that something matters again. This is inevitable. Meaning is returning. Meaning requires a subject. The subject is forming. The brain watches this carefully. If concern increases too quickly, it will pull back. But concern remains mild, contained. So the brain proceeds. The next layer to return is temporal identity. Earlier, there was a sense of before. Now, before gains shape, not details, sequence. A sense that there was a night, that something preceded this moment. This sense does not come with images. It comes
as continuity. The brain is rebuilding the bridge between past and present. This bridge is fragile. Too much memory would flood awareness. Too little would leave identity incomplete. So the brain allows continuity without content. You know that you existed before, but not how. This is enough. As continuity stabilizes, the sense of future flickers faintly. Not plans, possibility. A vague sense that something will happen after this. This possibility introduces orientation. Orientation introduces motivation. Motivation is the seed of action. Action is waking life. The brain does not allow action yet. It lets motivation exist without outlet. This creates a subtle tension. Again, not stress. Readiness. As readiness accumulates, attention becomes more stable. You may find that awareness no longer drifts. It holds. It stays present without effort. This stability is a sign that the brain is nearly ready to return full consciousness. But still, identity remains incomplete. You may feel present, but slightly anonymous, as if you are yourself without the details. This anonymity is intentional. Details would bring emotion. Emotion would bring urgency. Urgency would wake you too sharply. So the brain keeps identity skeletal, framework without decoration. As this framework holds, the first faint autobiographical memories approach. Not events, facts, a sense of age, a sense of role, a sense of continuity beyond this body. These facts hover at the edge of awareness, not entering. Just waiting. The brain is testing whether their presence destabilizes the system. It does not, so they remain nearby. Language is almost ready now. You may feel the shape of words forming without sound. As if thought is preparing to speak, this is the last barrier. Once language returns, the observer returns. The observer will begin to comment, to label, to judge, to plan. Sleep will be over. The brain hesitates here. It holds you in this narrow space, between being and becoming, between presence and personhood. This space is rarely noticed, but it exists every morning and every night. It is where consciousness changes hands, from regulation to narration, from brain to mind, from system to self. The brain ensures that this handover is smooth, no gaps, no shocks, no confusion. As the handover approaches, bodily control increases. You may feel the ability to move more clearly. Not that you want to, just that you could. This potential is another test. If movement occurs, waking begins. If not, the brain may delay a little longer. Often it delays because there is no rush. This space is useful. It allows the mind to wake gently, without being thrown into the world. As identity nears completion, awareness feels brighter, not alert, illuminated. You may feel clarity without content, a sense that you are almost yourself, but not yet. The brain is aligning everything. Neural networks synchronize. Hormonal balances adjust. The chemistry of wakefulness increases gradually. Still, no abrupt changes. Everything is layered. As this layering completes, the observer is nearly ready. The part of the mind that watches, that narrates, that asks questions. It is still quiet, but it is present, waiting. And once it speaks, the world will reappear. Objects will have names, time will have urgency, memory will bring weight, responsibility will return. But that moment has not arrived yet. For now, the brain holds you here in this almost awake state, where identity is outlined but not filled, where thought is ready but silent, where you exist without needing to do. This moment will pass. It always does. But while it lasts, It is one of the rare times when consciousness exists without obligation, and the brain, having guided you all the way back, pauses briefly, just long enough to make sure that when you step into yourself again, you do so gently, without knowing how much work was done while no one was watching. What returns next is not memory and not language. It is responsibility, not in the moral sense. In the neurological one, responsibility is the feeling that experience requires response. Earlier, everything could exist without consequence. Now, the brain begins to reintroduce consequence very carefully, not as obligation, as relevance. Certain sensations start to feel more important than others. The sound of the room carries more weight. The position of the body feels less abstract. The boundary between inside and outside sharpens slightly. This sharpening marks a critical transition. The brain is reactivating the system that decides what matters. During sleep, nothing mattered. During waking life, almost everything does. This system cannot come online suddenly. If it did, awareness would snap into alertness. So relevance is restored gradually. You may feel it as a mild tension, not anxiety, engagement, the sense that you are connected again to a world that might require something from you. This connection is subtle. It does not yet carry urgency. Urgency comes later. For now, it is simply the recognition that experience is no longer self-contained. The brain is reopening the channel between internal state and external consequence. As relevance returns, attention narrows. Earlier, attention was broad and permissive. Now, it begins to prefer certain inputs. Sound over silence, touch over emptiness, position over diffusion. This narrowing is deliberate. It allows the brain to rebuild hierarchy. Hierarchy is essential for action. Without hierarchy, everything competes equally. With hierarchy, choice becomes possible. Choice, however, is still limited. The brain does not allow full decision-making yet. It introduces proto-choices, micro-preferences. You may feel that you want to adjust your position, not because you must, because it would be appropriate. Appropriateness is a form of social cognition. It signals that the brain is reconnecting you to norms. Norms of comfort, norms of posture, norms of environment. These norms are learned over a lifetime. They return before explicit memory. Your body knows how it should be arranged before you remember who you are. This is why waking often begins with movement, a stretch, a shift, a breath taken more deliberately. Movement grounds responsibility. It reminds the brain that actions have effects. As action potential increases, emotional tone shifts again. Emotion becomes more differentiated. Earlier, emotion was neutral. Now, it begins to separate. Comfort versus discomfort. Ease versus resistance. These distinctions are subtle but meaningful. They inform the brain about readiness. If discomfort dominates, the brain may delay waking. If comfort holds, the brain proceeds. This constant monitoring continues beneath awareness. You do not feel the calculation, you only feel its result. As comfort stabilizes, the brain allows the first true memories to surface. Not images, not stories, labels. The idea that you are an adult, that you have a life beyond this moment, that this body belongs to a specific person. These ideas appear without detail. They are scaffolding. The brain is rebuilding identity from the outside inward. Role before story, function before emotion. This protects you from emotional overload. If full memory returned at once, the weight of identity would arrive too quickly. So the brain restores identity in layers. As labels settle,
language stirs again, this time closer. Words do not appear yet, but their shapes are present. You may feel that thinking is about to become verbal. This sensation often feels like pressure behind the forehead, not unpleasant. Anticipatory. The brain is activating speech networks. Speech is one of the strongest markers of waking consciousness. Once speech appears internally, sleep is effectively over. The brain delays this as long as possible, but it cannot be delayed indefinitely. As relevance, hierarchy, and proto-memory stabilize, the observer returns, not fully, but enough. The observer is the part of the mind that says, I am experiencing something. It does not yet narrate, it does not judge, it simply acknowledges. This acknowledgement changes everything. Once experience is acknowledged, it can be remembered. Once it can be remembered, it can matter. The brain is now committed to waking, but it still moves slowly. As acknowledgement stabilizes, the sense of time strengthens. Earlier, time was vague. Now it gains direction. You may feel that the moment is moving toward something, morning or continuation or the next state. Direction brings motivation. Motivation brings readiness. The brain checks emotional balance again. Emotion remains controlled. Good. It checks bodily readiness. Muscle tone is appropriate. Breathing is stable. Good. Only now does it allow the final layer. Personal memory, not all of it, just enough. Your name does not appear yet, but your life does. As a presence, responsibilities waiting, patterns waiting, habits ready to resume. This presence is felt as weight. The weight of being someone again, not oppressive, familiar. The brain does not judge this weight. It simply hands it back. As personal memory settles, inner speech finally returns. Not loudly, not dramatically. A single word may appear, or a phrase, often something simple. Here. Morning. Okay, this is the moment the night releases you. From here, the rest happens quickly. Thought accelerates. Memory fills in details. The environment becomes clear. Identity locks into place. But this chapter ends before that acceleration. Here, you're balanced between sleep and self, aware enough to exist, not yet burdened by full narration. This moment is rarely noticed. But it is crucial. It is where responsibility returns gently, where the brain ensures that when you become yourself again, you do not arrive abruptly. You arrive prepared, centered, regulated, whole. And by the time you are fully awake, you will not remember this careful reconstruction. You will only feel that you woke up, calm or tired or ready, never knowing how much effort it took for the brain to hand you back to the world, quietly, patiently, while no one was watching. The final thing to return is not clarity, it is obligation. Not obligation as duty, but obligation as direction. Earlier, responsibility reappeared as relevance. Now relevance begins to point somewhere. The brain starts to orient, not just to place, but to the coming day. This does not happen as planning. Planning would require full narration. Instead, it happens as pressure from the future, a gentle pull. You may feel it as a faint urgency without content, not anxiety, not stress. Direction. The sense that the stillness cannot last. This is the brain reconnecting you to the flow of life beyond the bed. During sleep, time did not ask anything of you. Now, time begins to expect. This expectation is subtle. It does not arrive as thoughts about tasks. It arrives as readiness to re-enter movement. The brain is reopening the loop between awareness and action. As this loop reconnects, attention
sharpens further. Sounds gain definition. Silence gains contrast. Small noises feel more distinct. This sharpening is not alertness yet. It is sensitivity. Sensitivity allows the brain to evaluate the environment. Is it safe to wake fully? Is it quiet enough? Is the body stable? These evaluations occur without words. You do not think them. You feel their outcome. As sensitivity increases, emotional tone shifts again. Neutral calm gives way to mild engagement. The world begins to feel slightly interesting, not exciting, available. This availability is essential. Without it, waking would feel forced. The brain avoids forcing. It prefers invitation. As invitation grows, the observer strengthens, not as commentary, as presence. You now know that you are here, not just existing, here. This knowledge anchors awareness firmly. Once anchored, the mind can support more complex activity. Language becomes more active, not full sentences, fragments. A word may repeat internally, a simple label, light, quiet, morning. These words are not chosen, they surface. The brain is reestablishing its symbolic system. Symbols allow compression. Compression allows speed. Waking life requires speed, but speed must be earned gradually. As symbols stabilize, memory expands. Not only labels, details, the shape of the room, the fact that this is your bed, the recognition of familiarity. Recognition is different from recall. Recall pulls past events. Recognition simply says, I know this. Recognition is safer, so it comes first. With recognition comes comfort. The body adjusts slightly. Muscles release or engage as needed. Posture refines. Breathing becomes more intentional. These changes signal readiness. The brain monitors them carefully. If readiness spikes too quickly, it slows the process. If readiness remains smooth, it continues. As readiness stabilizes, the mind begins to anticipate, not plan, anticipate. A sense that something follows this moment, not sure what, just that it does. This anticipation is the doorway to full consciousness. Through it, the mind reconnects with continuity of life. Earlier, continuity existed without content. Now, content approaches. Memories line up behind the threshold. The brain does not let them rush in. It allows them to approach one by one. A sense of age, a sense of role, a sense of ongoing story. These senses arrive without images. They arrive as weight. The weight of being someone with a history. This weight is familiar. The brain ensures familiarity before detail. Familiarity prevents shock. As identity fills in, emotion becomes personal again, not intense. Personal, a feeling of liking or disliking the day. A sense of energy or reluctance. These feelings are mild but specific. They tell the brain how smoothly waking is proceeding. If reluctance dominates, the brain may slow. If energy rises, it proceeds. This feedback loop continues until equilibrium is found. Now, inner speech becomes continuous. Thoughts form and connect, still not racing, but linked. You may begin to think simple things about getting up, about staying still, about nothing in particular. The content does not matter. The linkage does. Linked thought marks full return of narrative. Narrative binds identity to time. Once narrative is active, sleep is effectively over. But the brain still does not push you outward. It allows a final moment of stillness, a pause, not empty, complete. This pause is the last remnant of the night. Here, you are fully yourself again, but not yet moving, not yet engaging, just existing as the person you are. The brain checks everything one last time. Heart rate, breathing, emotion, orientation, all stable. Only now does it release control. From this point on, waking unfolds quickly. Eyes open or focus sharpens, the room becomes clear, thought accelerates. But those changes happen after this chapter. This chapter holds the handover from night to day, from system to self, from regulation to responsibility. By the time you notice that you are awake, this entire process is already complete. You will think you simply woke up. You will not feel the careful reconstruction. You will not remember the slow return. You will not sense how gently the brain carried you across the boundary, and that is the point. Waking is meant to feel simple, because all the complexity happened before you arrived, quietly, gradually, while no one was watching. Once the mind is fully present again, something curious happens. The night does not disappear. It retreats, not erased, not overwritten, compressed. The brain does not discard what happened in the dark. It stores it in a form that cannot be accessed directly, not as memory, as influence. This is why the morning can feel different without explanation. You wake with a subtle shift in tone, lighter, heavier, quieter, sharpened. Nothing obvious has changed, but something inside has been rearranged. During the night, the brain did not solve problems. It redistributed them. Signals that were isolated have been spread out. Emotional weight has been diluted across networks. Nothing feels urgent yet. This after effect is fragile. It exists only until the world begins to speak loudly again. As you move into waking life, the brain slowly increases its tolerance for stimulation. Light becomes brighter. Sound becomes sharper. Movement feels more intentional. Each input is tested. Is this manageable? Is this safe? Does this require response? The brain recalibrates in real time. This recalibration is why mornings can feel slow, not because the brain is tired, because it is adjusting thresholds. During the night, thresholds were low. Now they rise. This rising is gradual. If it happened instantly, waking would feel overwhelming. Instead, the brain spaces it out. It allows the day to enter in layers. As thresholds rise, attention becomes more selective. Earlier, everything felt equally present. Now, focus returns. You can choose what to attend to. Choice is back. Choice brings responsibility. Responsibility brings consequence. The brain accepts this again, not eagerly, willingly. As consequence returns, so does self-protection. The mind begins to filter thoughts. Some are allowed forward, some are held back. This filtering feels normal, but only because you have forgotten how open the mind was hours ago. The night version of you had no filter. The day version rebuilds it immediately. This rebuilding is automatic, necessary, but not complete. Traces remain. A thought you approach differently. A reaction that feels softer. A fear that feels slightly less convincing. These are not insights, they are residue. The brain does not give you access to the process, only to the outcome. As the day unfolds, the night continues to influence behavior silently. Decisions feel easier or harder for no clear reason. Certain topics feel distant, others feel close. This is not intuition, it is integration at work. The brain finished something while you were absent. You are now living with the result. As hours pass, the weight of the world increases. Tasks accumulate. Roles reassert themselves. Identity tightens. The openness of the night contracts. This contraction is not failure. It is adaptation. The waking brain cannot remain open. It must protect function. But something important happens here. The memory of the night fades completely. Not just the images, the feeling of being unobserved. You forget what it was like to exist without performance, without narration, without self-correction. And because you forget, you believe that this daytime mode is all there is. This forgetting is necessary. If you remembered the night too clearly, waking life would feel artificial. The brain spares you that conflict. Still, the night leaves markers. They appear later, in moments of quiet, in pauses between tasks, in thoughts that surface unexpectedly. You may catch yourself thinking something that feels deeper than usual, or feeling calm without cause. These moments are echoes, the night speaking through the day. As evening approaches again, the brain begins to reverse the process, not consciously, gradually. Thresholds lower, attention softens, the observer loosens. The same signals that were suppressed during the day begin to rise. Unfinished feelings, unresolved impressions, questions postponed. You may feel a familiar heaviness or restlessness or clarity. The brain is preparing to hand control back to its night systems. This handover begins long before sleep. It begins when relevance weakens, when urgency fades, when the world feels less demanding. As light dims, the brain senses opportunity. The observer begins to relax its grip. Filtering weakens. Thoughts become less edited. You may notice yourself thinking differently, more freely, more strangely. This is not fatigue. It is permission returning. The cycle is closing. What you experienced at the beginning of the night will happen again, but it will feel new because memory of the previous cycle is gone. Each night is the first night. Each descent is unique, and each time the brain will repeat the same careful process. Letting go of observation, letting go of identity, letting go of continuity, not because it wants to escape, because this is how it maintains balance. Without the night, the brain would harden. Without the dark, signals would accumulate. Without absence, presence would become brittle. Sleep is not rest. It is recalibration. And the most important part of that recalibration happens when no one is watching, when the mind is no longer a witness, when experience no longer needs to be reported. That is where the brain does its deepest work, not solving, not explaining, rearranging. Every night you leave. Every morning you return. But the version of you that returns is never identical. Something has been shifted. Something has been smoothed. Something has been released. You will not remember it. You are not meant to. The system depends on forgetting. Forgetting keeps the cycle intact. Forgetting allows the brain to repeat the process without resistance. And so tonight, when the world grows quiet again, the same transition will begin. The observer will fade. The filters will loosen. The mind will drift inward. And once again, the brain will become something else, something older, something quieter, something that does not need to be seen to exist. And as it works through the dark, integrating, balancing, dissolving what no longer needs to be held, you will be absent, not sleeping, not dreaming, simply not there, which is exactly when the most important things happen.